Chapter 111. What is this? The veiled woman was horrified and hurriedly retreated. In her eyes, this illusory and invisible sword intent was almost superior to everything. Even the moon goddess statue that the moon worship had worshipped for thousands of years paled in comparison. Buzz! An inexplicable aura suddenly appeared around the veiled woman. A large amount of blood essence burned, trying to release some kind of life-saving witchcraft. However, all of this was useless. The sword light that came from the sky slashed down in an instant. When the sword light touched the veiled woman's body, it kept splitting into billions of miniature sword lights, easily cutting every piece of the veiled woman's flesh into nothingness. The white-haired old woman saw this scene and felt her scalp explode. Watching the saintess being erased out of thin air almost made her legs go soft and she fell to the ground. When the veiled woman's body finally turned into nothingness, a dark golden goo worm appeared. Screech! The dark golden goo worm made a sharp screech, and then a large number of miniature sword lights swept over and cut it into nothingness. That is, the saintess's life goo worm? The white-haired old woman trembled, and a fear from the depths of her heart suddenly surged into her mind and filled her heart. The goo worm was the source of Nanjiao witchcraft. Everyone, including the moon worshippers, had to use the goo worm to release witchcraft curses. The life goo worm in the veiled woman's body had been passed down for thousands of years. It was one of the oldest goo worms of the moon worship. For thousands of years the moon worship had encountered many disasters, and even been destroyed and rebuilt several times. But this goo worm seemed to exist forever. But now, the white-haired old woman saw the dark golden goo worm turn into nothingness like the veiled woman. Plop! The white-haired old woman could no longer hold on. She knelt on the ground, her face ashen, and closed her eyes to wait for death. The white-haired old woman couldn't think of how she could survive. Even the goo worm that existed forever had died, let alone her. However, when the infinite miniature sword lights destroyed the dark golden goo worm, they didn't fall on the white-haired old woman. Instead, most of them quickly dissipated in the void. Only a miniature sword light flashed and branded into the white-haired old woman's body. A moment later, the white-haired old woman slowly opened her eyes. I'm not dead? The white-haired old woman found it hard to believe. Just now, he saw with his own eyes that the countless miniature sword lights were not damaged at all after the dark golden goo worm. Logically speaking, the next one to die should be her. I survived. I survived. The white-haired old woman was overjoyed. Although she did not understand why she was able to survive in the end, she was still alive. Hurry back to the Saint Church. Tell Sect Master everything that happened here. The white-haired old woman suddenly thought of something and immediately turned to flee. She wanted to rush back to the Moon Worship Center in Nanjiao as fast as she could. Chang'an City was too dangerous. Any random sword light could obliterate everything. Only the Moon Worship Center could give her a little bit of safety. Run! Run! Outside the Su residence, Su Qin's eyes were deep and serene, as if he could see the white-haired old woman fleeing in panic. Since the Moon Worship Center dared to reach out to the family Su, they had to be prepared to face the wrath of Venerable Arhat. The reason why Su Qin did not kill the white-haired old woman was that he wanted to use the white-haired old woman to lead the way and lock onto the location of the Moon Worship Center in Nanjiao. Nanjiao was located in the southwest. Although it was not as vast as the Empire of Tang, it would take Su Qin at least half a month to slowly scan the entire Nanjiao with his divine will to find the location of the Moon Worship Center in such a large area. And half a month? What did a month mean? It meant that there were 15 to 30 sign-in opportunities. It meant that there was the possibility of becoming infinitely stronger. Of course, Su Qin was not willing to give up so easily. Because of this, Su Qin branded a sword light in the white-haired old woman's body. With this sword light locking onto her, even if the white-haired old woman ran to the ends of the earth, Su Qin would be able to find her with a thought. In this way, when the white-haired old woman returned to the Moon Worship Center, Su Qin would only need to spend half a day to make a trip there. Just as Su Qin was deep in thought, everyone from the Su family also walked out of the mansion. Third brother, what are you doing out here? Su Yueyun asked curiously. She had just heard that there was something wrong with the jade pendant, but Su Qin walked out, leaving her confused for a long time. Yeah, little Qin, you just said that there was something wrong with the jade pendant. What exactly is the problem? Su Sungho also asked. It's fine now. I've already solved it. Su Qin glanced at the family Su, shook his head, and returned the jade pendant to Su Sungho. At this moment, all of the witchcraft curses in the jade pendant had disappeared, and the veiled woman had perished. Now this jade pendant was just a simple jade pendant. It's solved? Su Sungho and Su Yueyun looked at each other confused. They did not doubt Su Qin's words, but this problem was solved too quickly. Forget it. Let's find time to sell this jade pendant. Su Sungho took the jade pendant, looked at it repeatedly, and finally said with disinterest. They chatted for a while. Then Su Qin and Su Yueyun prepared to return to the palace. At the entrance of the Eastern Palace, Su Qin wanted to take a walk nearby and separated from Su Yueyun. This witchcraft is quite interesting. Su Qin walked slowly in the Imperial Palace, his thoughts fluctuating. Just through a jade pendant, Su Qin understood what kind of existence witchcraft was. Compared with martial arts training, witchcraft was more inclined to rely on external objects. The foundation of every witchcraft cultivator was not themselves, but the life source in the body. Once the life source is lost, the witchcraft cultivator will be reduced to an ordinary person, or even worse than an ordinary person. Unfortunately, being restrained by blood and qi, witchcraft is destined to not be on the stage. Su Qin shook his head slightly, and no longer thought about it. For ordinary people, witchcraft is strange and unpredictable, and can kill people invisibly. But in the eyes of martial artists, witchcraft is just a small path. Even to deal with Su Sungho, a martial artist in the lower realm, a saintess like the veiled woman had to consume 10% of her blood essence. It can be seen that martial artists are restrained by witchcraft. Unknowingly, Su Qin walked in front of a palace. Music hall. Su Qin raised his head and looked. Music hall is the place where the musicians in the palace of the Emperor of Tang live, and it is dedicated to playing music for the imperial family. Let's see if I can sign in here. Su Qin suddenly thought. No matter which dynasty, music occupies a certain position, and its history is extremely long. System sign in. Su Qin thought for a while and said in his heart. Chapter 112. Song of Death. Su Qin frowned slightly. Based on its name alone, the Song of Death should be a kind of musical composition that belonged to the musical score that was played by musicians and zither masters. Unfortunately, I probably won't need it. Su Qin shook his head slightly. He wasn't a musician at all and had no interest in music. Even if he had a peerless piece of music, he wouldn't spend much energy on it. However, since I've got it, there's no harm in taking a look. With a thought, Su Qin began to accept the system's infusion. Buzz. In an instant, all the secrets about Song of Death flowed slowly in Su Qin's heart. Su Qin only felt a burst of mournful music in his mind, faintly revealing the meaning of transcendence. A moment later, Su Qin suddenly opened his eyes. This Song of Death isn't simple. A trace of surprise appeared on Su Qin's face. At first, the weapon thought that the Song of Past Life was just a simple piece of music, but after receiving the system's installation, he realized that the Song of Past Life was not just a piece of music, but a combination of music and martial arts. When playing Song of Death, one could kill with the sound of the zither. It was a bit similar to Xiao Li's flying dagger. Within the range of the sound of the zither, anyone whose divine sense was not as good as Su Qin's would die. Su Qin had obtained countless divine skills from signing in at the Shaolin Temple, and there was no lack of such sound wave killing techniques. However, the killing intent revealed was too deliberate. For example, the Shaolin Temple's lion's roar used sound waves as a weapon. There were very few such natural sounds like Song of Death. Could even be said that there was no such thing. Not bad, not bad. Su Qin's face was filled with joy. After that, Su Qin once again returned to his peaceful and leisurely days. Although the palace was far from being as peaceful as the Shaolin Temple, it was about the same for Su Qin. The intrigue in the palace had nothing to do with him. As the brother-in-law of the crown prince, other people were already afraid of Su Qin. Who would dare to take the initiative to provoke him? On this day, Su Qin had just finished signing in. He suddenly felt something and looked toward the direction of the Temple of Immortals. The immortal palace was the resting palace of the Emperor of Tang. The Emperor of Tang is dying. Su Qin's gaze was calm. Whether it was the eye of truth or the divine sense, the Emperor of Tang, who was lying on the dragon bed in the longevity hall, was like a candle in the wind that could be extinguished at any time. Looks like we're missing an interesting person. Su Qin shook his head and sighed. Although he had not been in the imperial palace for long, he had interacted with the Emperor of Tang a few times. He felt that the Emperor of Tang was a good person. At least he treated Su Qin well and rewarded him with a lot of gold and treasures. He even wanted to transfer Su Qin to the imperial hospital. Although Su Qin did not care about these things at all, the Emperor of Tang had good intentions. Of course, Su Qin only felt that the Emperor of Tang was interesting. As for the rest, there was nothing else. The Emperor of Tang's death was completely because Shouyuan was approaching the end of his life. Under such circumstances, even venerable Arhat or a martial arts legend could not save him. It's good that he's dead. Living is torture. Su Qin thought silently in his heart. Although eunuch Zhao, a peak rank 1, was willing to use his own life to keep the Emperor of Tang alive, it did not mean that the Emperor of Tang could live comfortably. Now that he was dead, it was a kind of relief. However, that eunuch Zhao should not be able to live for long. Su Qin's heart skipped a beat. He carefully sensed eunuch Zhao's aura and judged in his heart. Eunuch Zhao was a peak rank 1. Logically speaking, even if he could not live for 200 years, Shouyuan should still be able to live for 180 or 190 years. Unfortunately, in order to make up for the loss of the Emperor of Tang's body, eunuch Zhao was willing to use his own life to prolong the Emperor of Tang's life. If eunuch Zhao was a peak rank 1 whose body had transformed, he would be able to hold on for a few years with his powerful body. However, eunuch Zhao's body was naturally damaged and could not transform. This caused eunuch Zhao to be close to the end of his life. Now that the Emperor of Tang was about to die, eunuch Zhao would not be able to live for long either. The Emperor of Tang is about to die. He should call the Crown Prince over to make arrangements for his funeral, right? Just as Su Qin was thinking this, he saw a red-clothed eunuch walk out of the longevity hall. His body turned into a blur, and in a moment, he arrived in front of the Eastern Palace's Changzhen Hall. Not long after, Crown Prince Li Shang walked out in a panic and quickly headed toward the longevity hall. Inside the longevity hall, the Emperor of Tang leaned quietly on the dragon couch. His face was calm, and he did not look like he was facing death at all. Your Majesty, this old servant is useless. I can't prolong your Majesty's life. Eunuch Zhao knelt on the ground and said softly, You've done enough. The Emperor of Tang forced a smile and said lightly, If it weren't for you, I would have died 10 years ago. At this moment, Crown Prince Li Shang quickly walked into the longevity hall and knelt before the dragon couch. He said in a trembling voice, Father, are you all right? You're definitely fine. I'll get the imperial doctor to come over. Crown Prince Li Shang wanted to stand up, but the Emperor of Tang pressed him down. No need. The Emperor of Tang looked at Crown Prince Li Shang and shook his head. I know my own body. It's already unexpected that I can live until now. When Emperor Li Shang said this, he coughed a few times. After a long time he continued, Before you entered Chang'an, I intended to let your brothers fight for power, win over the officials, and divide the imperial court. Now I've cleaned up those disloyal officials for you. Those who are left in the court now may not be loyal to you, but they are at least loyal to the Empire of Tang. After I die, you will take over a clean court that belongs to you completely. At that time you can fulfill your ambitions to your heart's content. However, I may not be able to see that time. The Emperor of Tang's voice lowered when he said this. Father. Crown Prince Li Shang's eyes were red. At this moment, how could he not know what the Emperor of Tang had done for him? Since he was still a commoner, the Emperor of Tang had begun to pave the way for him and completely eliminate the obstacles after he succeeded the throne. However, there's one thing that I've been soft-hearted about. The Emperor of Tang raised his head and stared at Crown Prince Li Shang. I should have killed all your brothers. Only then can you inherit the throne without any future troubles. The Emperor of Tang's tone flashed with a trace of complexity. Even though he had ruthlessly cleaned up the court several times, in the end, he had chosen to exile the princes instead of killing them to prevent future troubles. If they do anything in the future and are unwilling to be trapped in the fief, you don't have to worry. Just summon them back to Chong and kill them." The Emperor of Tang sighed softly. As if he had thought of something, his expression softened. "In this life I've done no wrong to anyone, but I've done wrong to your mother." The Emperor of Tang leaned on the dragon couch. A trace of nostalgia appeared on his face. His voice was like a mosquito's whisper. "Linger, I've done what I promised you." Crown Prince Li Shang looked at the Emperor of Tang, whose vitality had completely dissipated. He could not stop his tears and cried, "Father, father!" "Your Majesty!" Eunuch Zhao raised his head and whispered. Chapter 113. The Emperor of Tang has passed away. This news spread like a hurricane throughout Chong and city and to the surrounding countries at an extremely fast speed. His Majesty passed away? Sigh, if it weren't for His Majesty re-establishing the law of the Tang Empire, my family would have been banished to the border. His Majesty was wise all his life, how could he pass away? Shay. Countless people in Chong and city were mourning in their hearts. The Emperor of Tang has done a lot of practical things in his decades on the throne. Now that he has passed away, the people are naturally grateful for his kindness. At the same time, somewhere in a valley outside Chong and city, that old guy is finally dead. Prince Sun muttered to himself in shock. The Emperor of Tang had sent several princes to their fiefdoms, but Prince Sun returned halfway and deliberately waited outside Chong and city. It was for this news. When the Emperor of Tang was alive, he didn't dare to do anything. But now that he is dead, Prince Sun is no longer bound. Prince Sun's thoughts turned quickly, and he finally got up and went to the depths of the valley. The Emperor of Tang is dead. Prince Sun looked at the two figures in the depths of the valley and said respectfully, "The aura of these two figures is unfathomable, and they are vaguely integrated with the surrounding void. They are peak grade 1 great grandmasters. The one on the left is dressed in brocade clothes and has an elegant demeanor. He is King Wuyang of Nanming. King Wuyang is the granduncle of the current Ming Emperor. He stepped into the martial Dao since he was a child, and with the countless resources of Nanming, he finally stepped into peak grade 1 and became the foundation of Nanming. In order to sit on the throne, Prince Sun did not hesitate to join forces with Ming Emperor. After Ming Emperor agreed, in order to be foolproof, he directly sent King Wuyang over. In addition, Ming Emperor also sent 8 grade 1 great grandmasters of Nanming to follow him. As for the one on the right, he is an old man in a black robe with a strange and gloomy aura. The old man's name is Injo Bat, and he is also a peak grade 1 great grandmaster. However, there are hidden dangers in his cultivation technique, and he needs to drink human blood every once in a while. This time Prince Sun contacted Injo Bat and asked him to help him by providing 20 years of human blood. Although there are some peak grade 1 great grandmasters in the world, each of them is scattered all over the world, and they are too lazy to pay attention to Prince. Injo Bat is the only peak grade 1 great grandmaster that Emperor Chan. In order for Injo Bat to make a move, Prince Sun had to bear the cost of the other party's blood for the next 20 years. Your Highness Chan, don't forget that the human blood that this old man needs is the blood of martial artists. Injo Bat gloomily glanced at His Highness Chan. Martial's blood? Prince's Sun's won when he promised, he's martial emperor. Wuyang's Wuha's Wuyang's. However, when he thought of the great cause at hand, as long as Injo Bat made a move and helped him sit on the throne, he could endure anything. Prince, but the eunuch Zhao in the imperial palace. At this point, Prince Sun stopped and looked at Injo Bat and King Wuyang. Don't worry, leave that old thing to me, Injo Bat said indifferently. Prince Sun was slightly relieved when he heard this. In the entire imperial palace, the one he fears the most is eunuch Zhao. Because of this, even after getting the support of Nanming King Wuyang, a peak grade 1, Prince Sun was still worried and did not hesitate to ask Injo Bat for help. Your Highness Prince Sun, after killing the crown prince, how will you ascend to the throne? At this time, King Wuyang, who had been silent, suddenly spoke. Although Prince Sun is also a member of the imperial family, now that the crown prince has ascended to the throne, even if Prince Sun kills the crown prince, how can he convince the public? Don't worry. I have contacted the ministers that imperial father has demoted. As long as the crown prince dies, they will be brought back to Chang and enter the imperial court. Prince Sun has obviously thought of a way. Since there are ministers who are disobedient, then he can just replace them with a group of obedient ones. Although this will definitely be full of hidden dangers in the long run, at least it can help Prince Sun solve his urgent needs. In that case, let's set off. King Wuyang nodded slightly and looked in the direction of Chang and city. Outside the Long Life Temple, the civil and military officials knelt on the ground, wearing ribbons on their heads, looking sad. Crown Prince Li Shang is the same. Since the death of the Emperor of Tang last night, he has been standing here, staring blankly at the Emperor of Tang in the Long Life Temple. Your Highness, take care of yourself. A eunuch walked to Li Shang's side and whispered. I know. Crown Prince Li Shang calmed down. He knew that the most important thing now is to take over everything that the Emperor of Tang left for him. Li Shang turned slightly and looked at the civil and military officials who were also kneeling on the ground. He was about to speak. Suddenly, at this moment, a roar suddenly came from the imperial city in the distance. What happened? Crown Prince Li Shang was shocked and looked in the direction of the imperial city. Soon after, the commander of the Forbidden Army of the imperial city hurried over and bowed slightly to Crown Prince Li Shang. Your Highness, Prince Sun is outside. He is coming in. What? Crown Prince Li Shang's pupil shrank. After a while, Crown Prince Li Shang made a decision. You all come with me. Crown Prince Li Shang immediately rushed out of the imperial city. The rest of the officials looked at each other and quickly followed behind Crown Prince Li Shang. At this moment, outside the imperial city, Prince Sun stood there quietly. Injo Bat stood under the imperial city. Around him, more than a dozen grade 1 great grandmasters of the Empire of Tang were facing a great enemy. What about eunuch Zhao? That old thing won't make a move. Do you think you can stop this old man? Injo Bat smiled contemptuously with his hands behind his back. Although there are hidden dangers in his cultivation technique and he needs to drink human blood every once in a while, but in any case, he is still a peak grade 1 great grandmaster. How can he be stopped by more than a dozen grade 1 great grandmasters? The reason why he is not killing now is nothing more than being wary of eunuch Zhao. Although in front of Prince Sun, Injo Bat pretended not to care about eunuch Zhao, but in fact he was extremely cautious. A martial artist who can become a peak grade 1 great grandmaster is not a fool. How can he underestimate an existence of the same level? Just when the two sides were confronting each other, Crown Prince Li Shang finally arrived at the imperial city. Li Chan, Father Emperor, just passed away. What do you mean now? Crown Prince Li Shang glared at Prince Sun and said word by word. Oh, then I want to know. Prince Sun slowly walked out and looked at Crown Prince Li Shang with a cold gaze. You bastard, how can you sit on the throne? Today, I will let Father Emperor know that his choice was wrong. When Prince Sun said this, behind him, the 8 grade 1 great grandmasters of Nanming took a step forward. King Wuyang looked up at Crown Prince Li Shang and said indifferently, Your Highness Chan, do you need me to kill him? You are? The moment Crown Prince Li Shang saw King Wuyang, he immediately reacted. Nanming's King Wuyang? Li Chan, are you colluding with a foreign country? Crown Prince Li Shang did not expect that Li Chan, a prince of the Tang Empire, would actually collude with the Southern Ming Empire. Chapter 114. The Empire of Tang has been established for 560 years. During this period, there have been many princes fighting for the throne, and even brothers killing each other. But no prince has ever dared to collude with a foreign country. In the law of the Tang Empire, this is a felony of treason. Even if it is a prince, if he violates this bottom line, he will be stripped of his imperial status and then executed. Li Chun, you have to think clearly. What are you doing now? Crown Prince Li Shang snapped. Just now, his attention was focused on Injo Bat. But now, as King Wuyang raised his head, Crown Prince Li Shang finally realized that the situation was about to get out of control. Now there is only one peak grade 1. With the background of the Emperor of Tang's palace, Crown Prince Li Shang is confident that he can defeat him. But now there is also King Wuyang. The rest of the ministers were also shocked and angry, looking at Prince Sun in disbelief. Prince Sun was too lazy to pay attention to the crowd. Winner takes all. If he eventually ascends the throne, so what if he colludes with a foreign country? So what if it's a felony of treason? Isn't it still his own decision? King Wuyang, make your move. Prince Sun turned his head to look at King Wuyang and said. Hearing this, King Wuyang chuckled, took a step forward and disappeared. In an instant, Crown Prince Li Shang, who was far above the imperial city, suddenly felt a sense of palpitation. Not good. Crown Prince Li Shang wanted to retreat, but it was too late. King Wuyang had already appeared within 10 meters of Crown Prince Li Shang. For a peak grade 1 great grandmaster, a distance of 10 meters is covered in an instant. Crown Prince Li Shang can't hide at all. Your Highness, be careful. A loyal minister was shocked when he saw this scene. He subconsciously wanted to step forward and block in front of Crown Prince Li Shang. Bang! At this moment, more than a dozen red-clothed eunuchs appeared quietly and surrounded Crown Prince Li Shang, barely blocking King Wuyang's attack. Oh! King Wuyang raised his eyebrows and looked at the red-clothed eunuchs. These red-clothed eunuchs are all grade 1 great grandmasters. At this moment, they are protecting Crown Prince Li Shang. Is this the foundation of the Empire of Tang? King Wuyang shook his head slightly and said indifferently, Sorry to trouble you. Crown Prince Li Shang's expression was extremely grave. Before the Emperor of Tang passed away, he had told him everything about the Emperor of Tang's palace. The Emperor of Tang's palace has a total of 23 grade 1 great grandmasters. These 23 grade 1 great grandmasters only listen to the orders of the Emperor of Tang. Now that the Emperor of Tang has passed away, they are all under the command of Crown Prince Li Shang. However, although 23 grade 1 great grandmasters seem to be a lot, it is a bit difficult to block 2 peak grade 1 great grandmasters. Whether it was Injo Bat or King Wuyang, they were both famous peak grade 1 experts. Unless it was a martial artist of the same level, there was nothing that could move them. As for the army encirclement and suppression, if it was outside Chang'an City, this method could be used. Even if it was a peak grade 1, once trapped in an army of millions, if they did not escape, they would be exhausted to death. But now that they are in Chang'an City, encirclement and suppression is obviously unrealistic. Use an array. Crown Prince Li Shang said in a deep voice. When the red-clothed eunuchs heard this, they looked at each other and immediately changed their positions, faintly surrounding King Wuyang. On the other side, the more than 10 grade 1 great grandmasters who were fighting Injo Bat also stepped in a certain position, intertwining and cooperating with each other to faintly trap Injo Bat. This array was left by the founding father of the Empire of Tang. It can gather all the power of the array and exert the combat power of the weak to defeat the strong. Crown Prince Li Shang does not know whether this array is useful against peak grade 1 great grandmasters. But now he can only choose to fight. Huh. King Wuyang's eyes narrowed slightly, and a smile appeared on his face. It's a bit interesting. However, if you think you can deal with this, king, you are dreaming. Before King Wuyang's words fell, his figure disappeared again and rushed towards the red-clothed eunuchs. At the same time, Su Qin walked slowly to the front of the Long Life Temple. At this time, the Long Life Temple was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. The palace maids and eunuchs fled because of Prince Chen's attack on the imperial city. Su Qin slowly walked into the Long Life Temple. It's you? Next to the body of the Emperor of Tang, Eunuch Zhao, who was wearing a purple robe, glanced at Su Qin and said lightly, There are 2 peak grade 1 great grandmasters outside the imperial city who are about to enter. Take advantage of the time now and run for your life. Eunuch Zhao closed his eyes. In the past 10 years, in order to prolong the life of the Emperor of Tang, Eunuch Zhao has almost exhausted his vitality. Now he can't move. It is not an exaggeration to say that he is a lamp that has run out of oil. He may die in the next moment. Run for your life? Su Qin smiled and didn't say anything. No matter what, the Emperor of Tang and I were acquaintances. Now that he is dead, I am here to send him off. Su Qin said unhurriedly. The Emperor of Tang? Eunuch Zhao opened his eyes again and looked at Su Qin. If it wasn't for the fact that he couldn't move, he would have already punished Su Qin. Daring to address the emperor in such a manner is a crime of great disrespect. How do you plan to send His Majesty off? Eunuch Zhao stared at Su Qin with a dangerous glint in his eyes. Su Qin didn't care at all. He casually sat down and looked at the zither in front of him. The zither was dark green in color, and had a profound and mysterious feeling. It was placed not far from the dragon bed. Clearly, the Emperor of Tang liked it very much when he was alive. Play rebirth to send him off. Su Qin gently pressed his hands on the strings. Eunuch Zhao's expression sank. No matter what, the Emperor of Tang is still the Emperor of the Empire of Tang. Even if he dies, he should be put to rest by a special musician, which is in line with royal etiquette. Su Qin's move was tantamount to looking down on the Emperor of Tang. Just when Eunuch Zhao was about to act recklessly to stop Su Qin's behavior. Dang! Su Qin's right hand gently plucked the zither strings. An ethereal and lonely zither sound slowly spread out. In an instant, wherever the zither sound passed, the air faintly solidified, like a mountain shrouding everything. This is... Eunuch Zhao's complexion changed greatly, and he looked at Su Qin in disbelief. Outside the imperial city, the situation was gradually coming to an end. The 23 Grade 1 Great Grandmasters in the imperial palace of the Emperor of Tang acted together. With the array left by the founding father of the Empire of Tang, they barely stopped the 2 Peak Grade 1 Great Grandmasters, King Wuyang and Yin Bat. The 8 Grade 1 Great Grandmasters of Nanming also joined the battlefield, waiting for an opportunity to act. Ha 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 ha. Can't even withstand a single blow. At this moment, Yin Bat laughed wildly. He raised his hand and sent the 2 Grade 1 Great Grandmasters flying. He took a step and appeared above the imperial city. Little Crown Prince, that Eunuch Zhao hasn't appeared for so long. There must be a problem. In that case, go to hell for this old man. Yin Bat's expression was cold. He raised his right hand and slowly pressed it towards Crown Prince Li Sheng. Your Highness! All the civil and military officials exclaimed. Not good. The expressions of the more than a dozen red-clothed eunuchs surrounding King Wuyang changed greatly. They wanted to go back and save Crown Prince Li Sheng, but they were easily stopped by King Wuyang. Li Sheng! Su Yueyun, who had just rushed over, saw this scene and suddenly turned pale with fright. Die. If you die, the throne is mine. A cruel smile appeared on Prince Sun's face. Am I going to die? Crown Prince Li Sheng was in a trance. He only felt that the palm pressed down by Yin Bat was getting bigger and bigger, almost covering his entire field of vision. Just as Yin Bat was about to slap Crown Prince Li Sheng to death, and then return to slaughter the group of Grade 1 Great Grandmasters of the Emperor of Tang's palace. Dang! An ethereal and lonely zither sound came in an instant. It was as if the heavens and earth were long and time was rushing. Who is it? Yin Bat's eyes suddenly filled with horror. His right hand that was pressing down on Crown Prince Li Sheng seemed to be completely locked and could no longer move. No! Yin Bat roared hysterically. The next moment, under everyone's incredulous gaze, Yin Bat's whole body suddenly exploded, stirring up a mist of blood. This is... Everyone who saw this scene was stunned on the spot, fear in their eyes. Chapter 115. Chang'an City. Below the imperial city, Prince Chun, who originally had victory in his grasp, looked as if he had seen a ghost at this time. When Yin Bat, a peak Grade 1 Great Grandmaster, got rid of the more than a dozen Grade 1 Great Grandmasters of the Emperor of Tang Palace and appeared in front of Crown Prince Li Sheng, Prince Chun looked at Li Sheng as if he was looking at a dead man. Yin Bat is a peak Grade 1 Great Grandmaster. If he gets close, even an ordinary Grade 1 Great Grandmaster will die, let alone an ordinary person like Crown Prince Li Sheng who doesn't know martial Dao. But the next moment, the 9 Yin Bat that had a monstrous aura suddenly exploded, stirring up countless bloody mists. Prince Chun was dumbstruck and almost thought that he was hallucinating. This was a peak Grade 1 Great Grandmaster. Even if it was Eunuch Zhao in the Imperial Palace, it would take hundreds of moves to determine the winner between him and Yin Bat. But now he suddenly exploded into a blood mist. How incredible was this? Compared to the shock of Prince Chun, Crown Prince Li Sheng, who was closest to Yin Bat, was also dumbfounded. What happened? Why is he not dead yet? Crown Prince Li Sheng was ready to close his eyes and wait for death. But not only did he not die, but Yin Bat also died. What's going on? King Wuyang's scalp exploded, and monstrous waves were set off in his heart. although he looked down on Injobat's need to drink human blood every once in a while, but in any case Injobat is a true peak grade 1 great grandmaster. Now that the other party suddenly fell into such a state, the fear in King Wuyong's heart can be imagined. It's over. Let's retreat. King Wuyong glanced at the 8 grade 1 great grandmasters of Nanming, and suddenly made a decision in his heart. The Ming Emperor only asked him to help Prince Chan ascend to the throne, not to send him to his death. At this moment, Injobat's sudden explosion undoubtedly cast a shadow over King Wuyong's heart. If he continues, will he follow in Injobat's footsteps? The 8 grade 1 great grandmasters of Nanming looked at each other and began to slowly retreat. However, at this moment, clang! Another lonely and ethereal tune of the zither reverberated in the air. The surroundings became quiet and peaceful, yet it was filled with a feeling of transcendence. Everything that had happened in the past vanished into thin air. Only by being reborn in the afterlife would one be able to transcend. Bang! 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 As the zither sound spread, the 8 grade 1 great grandmasters of Nanming exploded and blood sprayed out. Not good. King Wuyong was shocked. It's zither music. King Wuyong finally reacted and looked around in disbelief. It wasn't until this moment that King Wuyong realized that whether it was Injobat or Nanming's 8 grade 1 great grandmasters, the reason why they suddenly exploded was probably because of the zither music. However, after discovering this, King Wuyong became even more desperate. If it were any other kind of attack, he would know how to block it. But the sound of the zither clang. Another guqin sound swept over, shaking the area continuously, ethereal and lonely. God! King Wuyong suddenly stopped and turned to look into the depths of the palace. The next moment, boom! King Wuyong's body also exploded. Clang! The sound of the zither was lonely and endless, faintly revealing grief and loneliness. It continued to spread and permeate, enveloping the entire Chang'an city. At this moment, the ethereal and lonely sound of the zither echoed in the ears of all the people in Chang'an city, from the old men to the babies waiting to be fed. Above the imperial city, Crown Prince Li Shang and the officials of the imperial court were also immersed in the sound of the zither. The sound of the zither that was fatal to King Wuyong, Injobat, and the others was like a heavenly sound in the ears of Crown Prince Li Shang and the others. After a while, the sound of the zither slowly dissipated. This is, Crown Prince Li Shang calmed down and looked down at the imperial city. He saw that under the sound of the zither, the 2 peak grade 1 great grandmasters, King Wuyong and Injobat, Nanming's 8 grade 1 great grandmasters, and Prince Chen's group all exploded. They're all dead. Crown Prince Li Shang was at a loss. Your Highness! Your Highness, are you okay? At this time, a group of ministers hurriedly rushed over and surrounded Crown Prince Li Shang, asking him all kinds of questions. Although the Emperor of Tang has passed away and Crown Prince Li Shang will ascend the throne sooner or later, but at least for now, he is not the Emperor of Tang, so he can only be called Your Highness. More than a dozen red-clothed eunuchs and other grade 1 great grandmasters of the Emperor of Tang's palace also came over. Eunuch Lu, do you know what's going on? Crown Prince Li Shang calmed down and looked at one of the red-clothed eunuchs. This red-clothed eunuch was Eunuch Lu. When Crown Prince Li Shang was wandering among the people, he was secretly protecting him and was a trustworthy person. Reporting back to Your Majesty, this old slave doesn't know. Eunuch Lu was silent for a while and said respectfully. His words were completely from the bottom of his heart. Just now, under the sound of the zither, he was instinctively immersed in the sound. When the sound of the zither dissipated, King Wuyong and the other people of Nanming were already dead. Your Highness! This general guesses that maybe it's because of the zither sound just now. At this moment the commander of the Forbidden Army said. When these words came out, the other grade 1 great grandmasters nodded slightly. They also had doubts at this time. After all, the zither sound was too strange. Zither sound. Crown Prince Li Shang fell into deep thought. Imperial Palace Ancestral Temple. The temple keeper's bent waist has now straightened, and the aura of a peak grade 1 pervaded his body. Zither sound. The temple keeper looked dignified. His eyes were fixed on the imperial city just now, especially when he saw Prince Chan colluding with Nanming and leading the enemy in. He was ready to take action. Although the temple keeper is a peak grade 1 great grandmaster, he is not loyal to the crown prince, the Emperor of Tang, but to the Emperor of Tang. If Prince Chan did not collude with Nanming, even if he really killed Crown Prince Li Shang and ascended the throne, the temple keeper would only watch coldly. He only needs to ensure that the prince of the Tang dynasty is surnamed Li. As for who it is, it doesn't matter at all. But Prince Chan colluded with a foreign country, which is different. However, just when the temple keeper was about to take action, the zither sound rang out. Then, 2 peak grade 1 great grandmasters, 8 grade 1 great grandmasters, and others all died. To kill 2 peak grade 1 and 8 grade 1 great grandmasters with zither sound, I'm afraid it's already the means of a legend, the temple keeper thought silently in his heart. Perhaps the grade 1 great grandmasters in the imperial palace do not understand what happened just now, but as a peak grade 1, the temple keeper naturally knows the meaning. Who is it? The temple keeper's thoughts turned quickly. Is it the one who entered the ancestral temple last time? In a flash, the temple keeper suddenly thought of something. Some time ago, the temple keeper was guarding the ancestral temple outside, but when he came in, he found that someone had sneaked into the ancestral temple without his knowledge and lit a stick of sandalwood. At the same time, inside the Long Life Temple, Su Qin's expression was calm and deep, and he slowly took his hand away from the azure zither. Chapter 116. Inside the Long Life Temple. The music lingered in the air. After Su Qin finished playing the song Rebirth, he was ready to go back. He came here with the intention of sending Emperor Li Shang off on his last journey, and also to clean up the cultivators outside the imperial city. Now that his purpose has been accomplished, Su Qin will naturally not stay for long. You. Eunuch Zhao's eyes widened as he looked at Su Qin in disbelief. Although he was like a lamp that had run out of oil and his life force was almost exhausted, his divine sense was still there. He could clearly feel that with the sound of the zither, the auras of the 2 peak grade 1 great grandmasters and 8 grade 1 great grandmasters outside the imperial city quickly disappeared. I didn't expect that His Highness the Crown Prince would marry the sister of a legend. At this moment, how could Eunuch Zhao not understand Su Qin's strength? His tone was complicated, but there was relief in it. A legend? Su Qin stopped and looked down at Eunuch Zhao. Your Majesty, you can go with peace of mind. Eunuch Zhao turned his head with difficulty and whispered to himself. His aura was getting weaker and weaker, and finally dissipated completely. Passed away. Su Qin shook his head slightly. He was not surprised. In order to extend the life of the Emperor of Tang, Eunuch Zhao constantly exhausted his life force. After the death of the Emperor of Tang, he could not hold on for long. It was extremely difficult for him to even move. Otherwise, it would have been impossible for him to let the 2 peak grade 1 great grandmasters outside the imperial city without doing anything. Now that he passed away, it was completely normal. You're quite loyal. Su Qin shook his head slightly and evaluated Eunuch Zhao in his heart. Most of the martial artists in this world are unruly, especially the peak grade 1 great grandmasters. They basically won't act easily. They all want to take the last step and live a carefree life for 500 years. But Eunuch Zhao is different. For Eunuch Zhao, the Emperor of Tang's life is far more important than him. Among the peak grade 1 great grandmasters in the world, he is obviously very different. Nanming. Inside the palace, Ming Emperor sat upright on the dragon throne, deep in thought. No one knew what he was thinking. At this moment, the commander of the embroidered uniform guard walked in respectfully and bowed. Your Majesty. Oh. Ming Emperor raised his head slightly, looked at the commander of the brocade guards, and asked casually, the Emperor of Tang has passed away. Granduncle should have arrived at the palace of the Emperor of Tang by now, right? Yes, Your Majesty. The last message I received from King Wuyang was that he joined forces with Injo Bat to attack the Emperor of Tang's palace. The commander of the embroidered uniform guards immediately replied. That would be great. With Granduncle and E9 Bat joining forces, even if that Eunuch Zhao is here, it's useless. Ming Emperor's tone was flat but full of confidence. Your Majesty, hesitating, the commander couldn't help but ask. Your Highness asked for 800,000 sets of armor from Prince Sun. Isn't that a bit too little? The commander of the embroidered uniform guards looked puzzled. Although 800,000 sets of armor could definitely make the Empire of Tang cut off a piece of meat, compared to them, Prince Sun had no choice at all. Not to mention 800,000 sets of armor. Even if it was 1 million sets, Prince Sun could only agree. 800,000 sets of armor? Ming Emperor smiled, and a trace of disdain flashed across his face. These 800,000 sets of armor are just to make him feel at ease. My purpose is not a mere 800,000 sets of armor, but the Empire of Tang. At this point, Ming Emperor suddenly stood up and said word by word, "Do you think I asked Granduncle to go to the Emperor of Tang's palace just to help the Emperor of Tang's son sit on the throne? Your Majesty, what do you mean?" The commander of the embroidered uniform guards was shocked and couldn't help but ask. "When the news from the Emperor of Tang's palace comes back, you will know." Ming Emperor paced slowly and didn't say much. Just when the commander of the embroidered uniform guards was secretly guessing, an imperial bodyguard hurriedly rushed in. "Your Majesty, the news from the Emperor of Tang's palace came." The imperial guard knelt on one knee on the ground, and cold sweat kept coming out of his forehead. "Oh!" A smile appeared on Ming Emperor's face. The commander of the embroidered uniform guards next to him was also full of curiosity. From the tone of Ming Emperor just now, it was obvious that he had a plan. Now that the news came back, he was naturally a little curious. "Read it." Ming Emperor leaned slightly on the dragon throne and said lightly, "Yes." The Imperial Guard braced himself and read. King Wuyang and 8 first-class Imperial Guards were all buried outside the Emperor of Tang's palace. No one survived. There was dead silence. After the Imperial Guard finished reading, he felt that the surroundings were quiet for a moment. Plop. The Imperial Guard trembled and knelt on the ground, not daring to look up. After a long time, Ming Emperor's voice slowly sounded, "Has the information been confirmed?" At this moment, Ming Emperor's voice was slightly hoarse, as if he was suppressing something. In fact, when he asked this question, he already had the answer in his heart. It involved a peak Grade 1 Great Grandmaster in Nanming, and the death of 8 Grade 1 Great Grandmasters. If it was not confirmed in every possible way, who would dare to send this information back? "Reporting back to Your Majesty, it has been repeatedly confirmed," the Imperial Guard said in a trembling voice. "You can go." Ming Emperor waved his hand and seemed to have aged 10 years in an instant. King Wuyang was the foundation of Nanming. Now that he died in the Emperor of Tang's palace, it was definitely an unprecedented blow to the entire Nanming. Not to mention that in addition to King Wuyang, there were also the 8 first-class Imperial Guards of Nanming. "You can also go." Ming Emperor glanced at the commander of the embroidered uniform guards kneeling on the ground and said in a low voice, "Yes." The commander of the embroidered uniform guards quickly retreated, not daring to mention the plan that Ming Emperor had just mentioned. Even King Wuyang was dead. No matter how many plans there are, they will dissipate like flowers in a mirror and the moon in the water. What happened in the imperial palace of the Empire of Tang spread throughout the world at lightning speed. Originally, the death of the Emperor of Tang and the ascension of the Crown Prince had attracted the attention of various countries. Now that Nanming was involved, it attracted the attention of countless forces. Everyone was watching the development of the Emperor of Tang's imperial palace with the attitude of watching a play. Many people were not optimistic about the Crown Prince. Prince Sun has the support of Nanming and Injo Bat, and 2 peak Grade 1 Great Grandmasters behind him. What can the Crown Prince use to resist? But with the fall of the 2 peak Grade 1 Great Grandmasters outside the Emperor of Tang's imperial palace, the world was completely shaken. This is a peak Grade 1 Great Grandmaster. How could he fall just like that? Just when the world was shocked by what happened outside the Emperor of Tang's imperial palace, Su Qin had returned to the right spring square and continued his leisurely life. For Crown Prince Li Shang, Su Qin's actions were tantamount to saving the imperial court and the hundreds of millions of people of the Empire of Tang. If Prince Sun ascends the throne, he will definitely clean up the current civil and military officials. Coupled with Nanming adding fuel to the fire, the Empire of Tang will soon fall into decline. But in Su Qin's eyes, it was just playing the song Reincarnation, which was nothing at all. Late at night, Su Qin's figure appeared in front of the imperial tomb. It seems that after being in the imperial palace for so long, I have never signed in at the imperial tomb. Su Qin stopped and looked at the imperial tomb of the Emperor of Tang in the distance, and suddenly thought. Chapter 117. The Imperial Mausoleum was the place where the emperors of the Empire of Tang were buried. It was majestic and had experienced the vicissitudes of life since the establishment of the Empire of Tang. System sign in. Su Qin thought for a moment and said in his heart. Although the Emperor of Tang's mausoleum only had a history of 500 to 600 years, with his status in the Empire of Tang, he should have gathered some Dao accumulations. Congratulations to the host for signing in successfully. You have received True Dragon Aura. A mechanical and cold voice sounded in Su Qin's ears. True Dragon Aura? Su Qin was slightly taken aback. In the next moment, the magical use of True Dragon Aura surged in Su Qin's mind. So this is the True Dragon Aura? Su Qin raised his right hand and saw wisps of golden aura flowing between his fingers. These golden auras gathered and scattered, and the outline of a dragon was faintly revealed. The True Dragon Aura was a special kind of aura. It was nurtured in the body for a long time, and had the effect of stabilizing and improving one's blood and qi. Even for venerable arhat in legend, the True Dragon Aura was a rare secret treasure. Perhaps in a short period of time, the True Dragon Aura wouldn't improve one's blood and qi by much, but over hundreds of years of accumulation, it would definitely produce a qualitative change and completely improve one's blood and qi by a level. Not bad. Su Qin's expression was satisfied. At his level, the influence of external objects was getting lower and lower. The True Dragon Aura was one of the few treasures that could directly improve one's combat strength. Ordinary venerable arhat or legend could use the power of the True Dragon to nurture their body for 400 to 500 years and completely improve their blood and qi by a level. But Su Qin wasn't an ordinary venerable arhat. His shoyuan was twice as long as the other venerable arhats, and it had been a full 1,000 years. Su Qin was looking forward to what would happen if his blood and qi were nurtured by the True Dragon Aura for 1,000 years. Time passed slowly. In the blink of an eye, a year had passed. Over the past year, Su Qin finally signed into the entire palace. Similar to the Shaolin Temple, most of the places in the Imperial Palace didn't have much Dao accumulation. It was only enough to sign in once or several times, but Su Qin still found more than a dozen locations where he could repeatedly sign in. This had completely exceeded Su Qin's expectations. It should be noted that even an ancient temple like the Shaolin Temple, which had been operating for thousands of years, only the Sutras Depository, the Demon Subduing Tower, and the Bodhi Yard could be used by Su Qin repeatedly. But in the Imperial Palace there were actually more than a dozen places that could be harvested multiple times. This made Su Qin extremely happy. And perhaps because Chong and City was the ancient capital of 10 dynasties, it had experienced more years of history than the Shaolin Temple. The things that Su Qin signed in the palace were generally of a higher level than the Shaolin Temple. For example, a treasure like the innate spirit liquid, which could increase the level of arhat without limit, was not something that could be obtained by signing in at the Shaolin Temple. Of course, this was not absolute, but overall. After all, Su Qin signed in at the Shaolin Temple, the strongest divine art Buddha's palm, and so far no other divine art was comparable to it. It's almost time to start breaking through and truly step into the fourth heavenly layer. Su Qin sat cross-legged, silently thinking in his heart. As early as in the Shaolin Temple, I was already at the peak of the third heavenly layer. In less than a year after coming to the Imperial Palace, I completed the fourth transformation of my body. Now after another year of adjustment, I'm afraid that I'm only half a step away from the fourth heavenly layer. It can even be said that I'm infinitely close. Su Qin's eyes lit up. Su Qin was a very cautious person otherwise. He wouldn't have stayed in the Shaolin Temple for nearly 30 years. I can break through tonight. Su Qin made a decision in his heart. Next, Su Qin walked out of the Right Spring Square and strolled slowly in the East Palace. Since the death of the Emperor of Tang a year ago, Crown Prince Li Shang moved out of the East Palace not long after, inherited the throne, and moved into the Long Life Hall, the bedroom palace of the past the Emperor of Tang. As for his little sister Su Yueyun, she was also conferred the title of Empress and lived in the Cunning Palace. During this period, many ministers objected. After all, the Empress conferred by the past the Emperor of Tang was generally a woman from a big family, which could play a role in stabilizing the situation of the court, but Su Yueyun was just a daughter of a local family. Logically speaking, conferring the title of concubine was already vast and mighty. As for the empress, it was simply impossible. However, the new emperor Li Shang insisted on conferring Su Yueyun as the empress and refused to budge an inch. Under such circumstances, no matter how dissatisfied the civil and military officials of the court were, they could only give in. After all, Li Shang was the emperor, the master of the empire of Tang. At most, the ministers could only persuade him, but if the emperor didn't listen, there was nothing they could do. And in this year, the new emperor Li Shang has also basically adapted to the current life, and has made enough progress in handling government affairs. When Su Qin occasionally scanned the entire palace with his divine sense, he saw that the new emperor Li Shang often dealt with state affairs until midnight, and his travel was extremely simple. Generally, when a new emperor ascends the throne, he will definitely be extravagant and luxurious, but Li Shang didn't. Everything was still the same as during the reign of the emperor of Tang, and there were almost no changes. Su Qin was quite satisfied with this. If Li Shang was a wise emperor, the empire of Tang wouldn't have so many troubles, and he could sign in and cultivate in the palace with peace of mind. Just as Su Qin was thinking, his heart suddenly moved. He saw the new emperor Li Shang walking towards the East Palace with a few accompanying eunuchs. Are they looking for me? Su Qin raised his eyebrows. Since the new emperor Li Shang and Su Yueyun moved out of the East Palace, the huge East Palace had become much quieter. Except for Su Qin, there were only a few eunuchs and palace maids left. The new emperor Li Shang came here specifically to see Su Qin. Soon, the new emperor Li Shang came to the right spring square. Your Majesty, do you want this old servant to go in and announce the decree? A eunuch next to him bowed and asked. No need. The new emperor Li Shang shook his head, took a few steps, and waved his hand towards the right spring square. Third brother. Su Qin walked out unhurriedly and looked at the new emperor Li Shang. Okay, all of you can leave. I want to stay with the third brother for a while. The new emperor Li Shang glanced at the eunuchs. Yes. The eunuchs respectfully said. Then turned and left. Third brother, I've been bored to death this year. The new emperor Li Shang complained to Su Qin. That old man, the minister of rights, has been staring at me all day, and the minister of revenue has been asking me for money all day long. How can I have so much money? Su Qin smiled and didn't say anything. In the past year, the new emperor Li Shang would talk to Su Qin every once in a while and confide in him about some of his troubles. The two of them chatted for a while as they strolled along the shady path at the side. As a gentle breeze brushed past his face, the new emperor Li Shang's expression was clearly much better. He was the emperor of the empire of Tang and had the greatest power in the world. But in fact, while an emperor had the greatest power, he also had to bear the heaviest pressure. Chapter 118. As Su Qin listened to the complaints of the new emperor Li Shang, he felt more and more that his choice was correct. No matter where it was, whether it was the Shaolin Temple or the Imperial Palace, the more you get, the more you have to give. Now Su Qin seemed to have no power in the Imperial Palace, but in fact, he was the most leisurely one. Every day he would sign in, cultivate, wander around and continue to become stronger. Wouldn't that be wonderful? In the Imperial Court, the courtiers respect and fear me, but in the past year, factional disputes have gradually appeared. When the new emperor Li Shang talked about this topic, his tone gradually became heavier. In fact, no matter which dynasty, factional disputes were inevitable. However, before Li Shang ascended the throne, the emperor of Tang had already cleaned up the imperial court and infinitely weakened the factional disputes. But after a year, especially after the imperial examination, the factional disputes had begun to appear again. This made the new emperor Li Shang very tired. He allowed the courtiers to fight among themselves, but the premise of all this was to put the interests of the empire of Tang first. But once a faction was formed, for some courtiers, the interests of their own faction might be greater than the interests of the empire of Tang. Factional disputes? Su Qin thought for a while and asked casually, why are there factional disputes? It's very complicated to explain. The new emperor Li Shang thought for a while and stopped talking. The talented officials of the empire of Tang are basically produced through the imperial examination. and the imperial examination is handled by the chief examiner, which leads to the examinees of the imperial examination held by this chief examiner are all under his wing. In this way, when this group of examinees enters the imperial court, they will naturally stand by this chief examiner's side and form their own faction to exclude outsiders. The new Emperor Li Shang explained the main source of the factional disputes in a few words. In fact, the Emperor of Tang knew about this. But knowing was one thing, he couldn't solve it. He couldn't possibly cancel the imperial examinations, right? Or, every once in a while, clean up the imperial court like the Emperor of Tang did? Third brother, what do you think of this? Emperor Li Shang rubbed his forehead and looked at Su Qin. My opinion? Su Qin pondered for a moment. Since the reason for the conflict between the factions is the head examiner, why don't we just change the head examiner? Su Qin said casually. Change the chief examiner? The new Emperor Li Shang's eyes lit up, but they dimmed in an instant. He shook his head and said, the imperial examination involves all the candidates in the world and concerns the inheritance of the Empire of Tang. The chief examiner can only be chosen from the officials in the imperial court. Because only the officials standing in the imperial court have enough influence to convince the examinees. But this way, no matter who it is, they will push that batch of examinees under their wing and form a faction. Emperor Li Shang said bitterly, you misunderstood what I meant. Su Qin shook his head and continued, I don't want to change the chief examiner to another official. Not another official? Emperor Li Shang was slightly stunned and did not understand. You can be the chief examiner. Su Qin looked at Emperor Li Shang and said casually, I'll be the chief examiner. I'll be the chief examiner. I'll be the chief examiner. The more Emperor Li Shang thought about it, the brighter his eyes became. The main source of the conflict between the factions was that the examinees of that year would be placed under a certain chief examiner. In the long run, there would be many factions in the imperial court and factions would naturally form. But if the Emperor of Tang was the chief examiner, all the examinees would be placed under the Emperor of Tang's wing. In this way, there would only be one faction in the imperial court. The conflict between factions meant that there were many factions fighting with each other. But if there was only one faction, what was the point of fighting? Everyone was on the same side. Why would they fight? Under such circumstances, the conflict between factions would naturally disappear. Third brother. You've really reminded me. Emperor Li Shang's face was filled with joy. He hurriedly said, I'll go back first. I'll come find you tomorrow. Emperor Li Shang anxiously returned to the Palace of Immortals. Su Qin looked at Emperor Li Shang's back as he left. His smile gradually faded. It's about time. Su Qin looked at the sky and returned to the right spring square. At this moment, in addition to the 5 elements reversal formation, Su Qin had also set up several other formations in the right spring square. The main purpose of these formations was to suppress the aura and prevent it from leaking out. This way, the commotion caused by Su Qin's breakthrough would not affect the outside world. This would save Su Qin the trouble of running outside every time he broke through. Begin. Su Qin sat down cross-legged and focused. Swoosh! Hundreds of bottles of elixirs appeared. Apart from that, there were more than 100 drops of Khanate spirit liquid. These were the Khanate spirit liquid that Su Qin had been accumulating over the past year. His goal was to break through today. The Khanate spirit liquid was gentle and had obvious effects. Whether it was during normal cultivation or during critical moments, it was extremely effective. There's also this. In front of Su Qin, a pale golden Bodhi heart with mysterious lines faintly appearing on its surface appeared again. It was the Millennium Bodhi heart. During this period of time, Su Qin had been cultivating and comprehending heaven and earth. Therefore, he had deliberately placed the Millennium Bodhi heart back into the system space. Now that he was breaking through, he naturally needed the Millennium Bodhi heart to protect his mind in order to be foolproof. Although Su Qin did not think that he would need the Millennium Bodhi heart given his current preparations, it was better than nothing. In the next moment, Su Qin slowly closed his eyes. Swoosh! Inhale. As Su Qin breathed, the more than 100 drops of Khanate spirit liquid in front of him immediately turned into flowing water and flowed into Su Qin's mouth. At the same time, the other elixirs were also swallowed by Su Qin. Suddenly, The true essence in Su Qin's body continued to surge, and the aura he exuded became more and more terrifying. If it were not for the heaven and earth array, the entire Chong and city would have been shaken. After swallowing more than 100 drops of Khanate spirit liquid and hundreds of bottles of elixirs, Su Qin's true essence began to surge crazily. Even though the Khanate spirit liquid was gentle, it was based on the premise that it was taken drop by drop. If Su Qin's body had not gone through 4 transformations and even developed a trace of immortal metal attribute, he would have exploded and died. Rumble! Su Qin's qi and blood surged like a millstone of heaven and earth slowly rotating. Buzz! At this moment, Su Qin's true essence that was constantly circulating seemed to have undergone a transformation and began to transform in a strange direction. The transformed true essence was more powerful and profound, as if it could overwhelm heaven and earth. Time passed slowly, just as all the true essence in Su Qin's body had transformed into that more powerful and profound true essence. Su Qin's aura that had been rising suddenly began to shrink, as if it had turned into a black hole and completely sank. In the next moment, Su Qin slowly opened his eyes. Is this the Arhat state of the 4-level heaven? Su Qin carefully felt the changes in his body, and a smile appeared on his face. Chapter 119. In the right spring square. Su Qin was overjoyed. At this moment, the true essence flowing in his body was several times more than before the breakthrough, and the original true essence had transformed into another type of true essence. This true essence was more powerful and profound, as if it could overwhelm heaven and earth. Not bad, not bad. Su Qin was extremely satisfied. When he broke through from Arhat's first heaven to Arhat's third heaven, it only increased his true essence by several times. Now that he had just stepped into the 4th heaven, it had already exceeded this increase. What was even more frightening was that after this breakthrough, Su Qin's true essence had undergone some kind of qualitative change, completely transforming into another type of true essence. Compared to the increase in quantity, Su Qin was more looking forward to the quality improvement. Let's not worry about the true essence for now. Let's see how much my control of heaven and earth's power has improved after stepping into the 4th heaven. Su Qin's mind slowly integrated into the surrounding heaven and earth. Compared to the 9 grades of the martial Tao, the biggest difference between Venerable Arhat and Legends was their control of heaven and earth's power. Among the 9 grades of the martial Tao, even a grade 1 great perfection martial artist could only slightly draw on heaven and earth's power. But if one became Venerable Arhat or Legend, they could completely control heaven and earth's power, and their every move would be like heaven and earth with vast power. This was also the reason why Venerable Arhat and Legends could ignore the Sea of People tactic. Unless facing a powerhouse of the same level, Venerable Arhat and Legends had nothing to worry about. Wang! Su Qin's mind continued to spread until it reached a radius of 20 miles with him as the center. My control of heaven and earth's power has reached 20 miles. Su Qin's face was full of joy. When he was at the 1st heaven Arhat, he could control heaven and earth's power within a radius of a few miles, and when he reached the 3rd heaven great perfection, his control of heaven and earth's power increased to 10 miles. Then, no matter how Su Qin cultivated, his control of heaven and earth's power was firmly fixed at 10 miles, as if the heaven and earth's power within a radius of 10 miles was the limit of 3rd heaven Arhat. The heaven and earth's power within a radius of 20 miles can increase my strength by more than 10 times. The joy on Su Qin's face grew stronger and stronger. The difference between a radius of 10 miles and a radius of 20 miles seemed to be only 1 time, but in reality it was a world of difference. Whether it was the vastness of the power of heaven and earth or the flexibility of the power of heaven and earth, the two were on completely different levels. No wonder it said that there will be a qualitative change when a 3rd heavenly layer breaks through to the 4th heavenly layer. From the looks of it now, it's not just a qualitative change. Su Qin sighed in his heart. Arhat at the 4th celestial layer is already so powerful, then what about the 7th celestial layer? Or even the 9 heavens? Could it really destroy the heavens and earth? Su Qin's thoughts fluctuated. Su Qin didn't know if a 9th heavenly layer legend had ever been born on this continent, but for a Buddhist holy land like the Shaolin Temple, which had been passed down for thousands of years, the strongest person that had appeared since its opening was only a 6th heavenly layer Arhat. And according to Su Qin's understanding from the ancient books in the Shaolin Temple, The reason why this venerable arhat was able to cultivate to the sixth heavenly layer was entirely because he found a great opportunity in the depths of the endless ocean. The endless ocean. Su Qin raised his head slightly and looked beyond the continent. As early as the animal skin on the Devil Lord's body, Su Qin knew that there was probably another world in the depths of the endless ocean. The depths of the endless ocean. Although there are great opportunities, there are also great risks. More than 2,000 years ago in the Shaolin Temple, a venerable arhat went to the endless ocean and never came back. Now, as long as I continue to sign in, I can continue to become stronger. There's no need to go to the endless ocean. Su Qin shook his head slightly. Other martial arts legends crossed the endless ocean because their own strength was difficult to improve, or because Shou Yuan was facing the end of his life. They had no choice but to do so to win that glimmer of hope. But Su Qin was different. He, Shou Yuan, had plenty of resources and could live for 970 years. Plus, he didn't lack cultivation resources. Why would he risk going to the endless ocean? It was like a crown prince of a certain country who was about to inherit the throne and rule the world. But he wanted to rise from nothing and abandon everything. Wasn't that a fool? Su Qin was a cautious person. Of course, he would choose the safest and most secure path. Now I'll stabilize my realm first. Su Qin thought for a while and slowly closed his eyes again. The true essence of the past Amitabha Sutra kept circulating. Time passed slowly. The next day, Su Qin stabilized his realm slightly and officially came out of seclusion. Everything in the palace was as usual. Now that the new emperor was diligent in his work, the empire of Tang seemed to be thriving. However, the eastern palace had always been cold and cheerless. But Su Qin didn't care about that. He liked peace and quiet, and the current environment of the Eastern Palace was exactly what he wanted. Time really flies. Su Qin slowly paced back and forth, thinking leisurely. Unknowingly, he had been in this world for 30 years. Also unknowingly, he had become Arhat, fourth heaven. Next, Su Qin once again returned to his previous life. After becoming Arhat, fourth heaven, Su Qin didn't have any feelings of complacency, because he knew that there was always someone better than him. In the depths of the endless ocean. Just as Su Qin was checking in and cultivating every day. A year passed in the blink of an eye. In this year, the new Emperor Li Shang abolished the chief examiner of the imperial examination system of the Empire of Tang. As the Emperor of Tang, he personally became the chief examiner. In the future, every batch of examinees would no longer be disciples of some minister, but disciples of the emperor. As expected. With the reality of this move, the factionalism in the imperial court eased a lot. The new Emperor Li Shang knew that this move couldn't completely eradicate the factionalism, because as long as there were people in the imperial court, there would inevitably be factionalism. But it could slow down the factionalism to a great extent. And to be able to do this, the new Emperor Li Shang was already satisfied. Late at night, all the civil and military officials hurried to the Taiji Palace. The new Emperor Li Shang sat on the dragon throne with a gloomy expression. The officials in the imperial court also had solemn expressions, as if something big had happened. After a long time, the Minister of Revenue braced himself and said respectfully, "Your Majesty, where did this news come from? Is it true or false?" As soon as he said this, Emperor Li Shang suddenly stood up and said in an extremely depressed voice, "Is it true or false?" Emperor Li Shang took out a piece of paper and read it word by word. On the night of the full moon, I will borrow the imperial palace. Brother Chueshua and I will discuss the Tao of the sword. White Cloud City's city lord Yi Guqing. After Emperor Li Shang finished speaking, he looked directly at the civil and military officials in the imperial court. This matter has already spread out, and the whole world knows about it. Tell me, what should I do? As soon as Emperor Li Shang's voice fell, the complexions of the officials in the imperial court suddenly changed. Although they are not martial artists, they know a thing or two about White Cloud City's city lord Yi Guqing. In the current world, although peak grade 1 great grandmasters are extremely rare, there are some. And among the peak grade 1 great grandmasters, White Cloud City's city lord Yi Guqing is definitely one of the most dazzling ones. Chapter 120. In the Taiji Palace. All the civil and military officials were silent. Although peak grade 1 great grandmasters have shaken the world, there are still differences between them. And the White Cloud City Lord Yi Guchang is definitely one of the most powerful peak grade 1 great grandmasters. Because what Yi Guchang cultivates is Sword Dao. Sword Dao focuses on killing and is known as the sharpest. As a peak grade 1 great grandmaster in terms of attack, Yi Guchang is probably close to grade 1 great perfection who has undergone third transformation. The officials never dreamed that the Empire of Tang would face Yi Guchang, the city lord of the White Cloud City. If Yi Guchang wants other things, even if it is 10,000 gold or the position of king, it is not impossible to negotiate. But if he wants to borrow the Emperor of Tang's palace, the Emperor of Tang's palace is the face of the Empire of Tang. If Yi Guchang is allowed to borrow it, then the Empire of Tang will become the laughingstock of the world in the future, and will never be able to raise its head again. The Empire of Tang has been established for more than 500 years. When has it ever suffered such humiliation? Brother Chueshue? Is it Shiman Chueshue? Some officials muttered to themselves, and suddenly their complexion changed again. The rest of the officials obviously realized something, and their expressions were extremely ugly. The only person who can make the dignified White Cloud City Lord call him Brother Chueshue is probably Shiman Chueshue, who is also a peak grade 1 great grandmaster and is known to be close to God. What should we do? The officials felt cold in their hearts. If it was just Yi Guchang alone with the current foundation of the Empire of Tang, they may be able to resist. But with Shiman Chueshue at it for a moment, all the officials trembled. Emperor Li Shang saw this scene and sighed softly. This is the biggest drawback facing the Empire of Tang today. There is no peak grade 1 great grandmaster. Since the death of the Emperor of Tang, the only peak grade 1 great grandmaster in the Emperor of Tang's palace, Eunuch Zhao, also passed away. In the past 2 years, Emperor Li Shang has been trying to cultivate a peak grade 1 great grandmaster, but unfortunately, he has not seen any hope. Even if the new Emperor Li Shang used all the resources of the Empire of Tang, the results were slow. Peak grade 1 great grandmaster involves a transformation of the body, unless there are a few rare treasures, such as the spirit concentration pill and so on. Moreover, even if it was a spirit concentrating pill, it would only be effective when one's spirit was nurtured to the extreme. Otherwise, he could only rely on himself. The influence of external factors was almost negligible. Although the new Emperor Li Shang had vaguely guessed that the existence who had killed Nanming Wuan Wang and Inzhou Bat with zither music back then might be a peerless expert. However, he hadn't seen the other party yet, so he wasn't sure if the other party would attack again. Perhaps this peerless expert just happened to pass by the Emperor of Tang's palace and then left? No matter what, the new Emperor Li Shang would not place his hopes on an uncertain factor. Because he was the Emperor of the Tang dynasty. Your Majesty, don't be impulsive. When the ministers saw the determination on Emperor Li Shang's face, they immediately knelt down and persuaded him bitterly. How could these ministers not know about Yi Guchang's provocation? But in the face of 2 peak grade 1 great grandmasters, who are known as the best in terms of offense, the Empire of Tang simply can't afford such a huge change. Impulsive? This Yi Guchang stepped on my face, and you're telling me not to be impulsive? Emperor Li Shang kept pacing back and forth. His tone was low. Nowadays, the various countries seem to have stopped fighting, but the Empire of Tang occupies the vast and rich central plains and is being targeted by many countries. For example, when the Emperor of Tang died 2 years ago, the Ming Emperor sent King Wuyang to test the background of the Empire of Tang. Fortunately, whether it was King Wuyang or Inzhou Bat, they both died in the imperial city, which deterred the other countries and made them not dare to make any moves. It was for this reason that the world was calm for 2 years. However, if Yi Guchang was allowed to borrow the Emperor of Tang's palace this time, it would be tantamount to exposing the weakness of the Empire of Tang in front of the world. At that time, the Empire of Tang will not only face a loss of face, but also a war launched by the other countries. Since Your Majesty insists, we can only obey. The minister who had just spoken raised his head to look at Li Shang, sighed deeply and bowed. Good. The new Emperor Li Shang stopped and looked down at the court. I will recall all the grade 1 great grandmasters in the Empire of Tang back to the palace. In addition, I will mobilize the army near Chang'an City. The new Emperor Li Shang sat back down on the dragon throne and calmly gave out orders. In the Emperor of Tang's palace there are 23 peak grade 1 great grandmasters, But it does not mean that there are only 23 Grade 1 Great Grandmasters in the Empire of Tang. There are also some Grade 1 Great Grandmasters in other places, or in the Tang Empire, there are also Grade 1 Great Grandmasters. Although the Grade 1 Great Grandmasters do not listen to the Emperor of Tang's orders, the Emperor of Tang can pay a price to ask them to act. As for the army near Chang'an City, it is Emperor Li Shang's biggest deterrent. Even if a peak Grade 1 Great Grandmaster is trapped under the siege of an army of hundreds of thousands, there is a risk of death. At the same time, inside the East Palace, Su Qin walks slowly on the shaded path. Since entering the fourth heavenly layer a year ago, Su Qin's cultivation speed has slowed down again. Sigh, sure enough, there is no shortcut in martial Dao cultivation. It can only be done step by step. Su Qin sighed softly, his face full of emotion. Even with the continuous consumption of innate spirit liquid, 9 revolutions whirling pill, and glazed golden core, his progress was still so slow. One can imagine how difficult it is to cultivate above the fourth heavenly layer. Of course, the slow in Su Qin's mouth is relative to the speed before the breakthrough. If compared with other arhats and legends, it would definitely be many times faster. However, the palace has not been peaceful recently. Su Qin seemed to have thought of something, and released a huge amount of divine sense, sweeping the entire palace. Su Qin usually does not always cover the palace with his divine sense, but every once in a while. Night of the full moon. Borrowing the palace? White Cloud City Lord Yi Guqing. Shimen Chueshua. Su Qin raised his eyebrows and a trace of surprise flashed in his eyes. In the sweep of his divine sense just now, Su Qin heard these words from more than one palace maid and eunuch. The people in the palace were in a panic, and although many palace maids and eunuchs did not dare to talk about it openly, they were still talking carefully in secret. Interesting. Using the palace as a battlefield to seek a breakthrough. Su Qin shook his head slightly, his face full of confusion. If they really dare to come, just slap them to death. Su Qin walked unhurriedly, thinking casually in his heart. In any case, the Emperor of Tang is now his brother-in-law, and Su Qin also regards the entire palace as his own back garden. How can he let 2 flies fly in front of him? Besides, in the eyes of the current Su Qin, not to mention 2 peak Grade 1 Sword Dao Great Grandmasters, even if there are 20 or 200 of them, they are nothing at all. Chapter 121. Everyone in the palace was panicking, but Su Qin leisurely came to the crop altar. Logically speaking, the crop altar was a place where the Empire of Tang offered sacrifices to heaven and earth. Ordinary people were forbidden from approaching, but Su Qin was the brother-in-law of the current the Emperor of Tang. How could the forbidden army guarding the crop altar dare to stop him? It just so happens that today's sign-in opportunity has been refreshed. Let's sign in while I'm at it. Su Qin stood in front of the crop altar with anticipation in his heart. After so many sign-in experiences, Su Qin discovered that the crop altar in the palace should be equivalent to the Bodhi court in the Shaolin Temple. It was specially designed for sign-in to obtain treasures that could improve one's strength. For example, innate spirit liquid, system sign-in. Su Qin said in his heart. Congratulations to the host for sign-in successfully. Receive Blood Bodhi X3. A cold, mechanical voice sounded in Su Qin's ears. Blood Bodhi? Su Qin's mind merged into the system space and soon found 3 Blood Bodhi that had just appeared in a corner. Blood Bodhi was a strange fruit that was as red as blood. According to the system's introduction, Blood Bodhi had the effect of increasing one's strength and healing serious injuries. Can this thing be eaten? Su Qin returned to the right spring square, sat cross-legged, and took out one of the Blood Bodhi from the system space. Su Qin carefully looked at the Blood Bodhi and found that this strange fruit was crystal clear all over. The flesh of the fruit seemed to be flowing with blood. When Su Qin held it in his hand, he could even feel a boiling heat like magma and hot blood. It's not blood. Su Qin shook his head slightly. Gulp. The next moment, Su Qin directly swallowed the Blood Bodhi in front of him. Well, it's sour and sweet. The taste is not bad, much better than those pills. Su Qin chewed the Blood Bodhi a few times and felt as if he had swallowed a spirit fruit, leaving a lingering fragrance in his mouth. In the end, the juice of the Blood Bodhi turned into wisps of heat and rushed towards Su Qin's limbs and bones. Not bad, not bad. It's about the same as primordial spirit liquid. Su Qin carefully sensed and judged in his heart. The help that one blood bodhi provided to Su Qin was equivalent to a drop of connate spirit liquid. Apart from that, the biggest difference between the blood bodhi and the connate spiritual liquid was that it was more refreshing. As for the blood bodhi's other use, it could heal serious injuries. Su Qin hadn't sensed it yet because Su Qin's body had gone through 4 transformations. Coupled with the fact that he had entered the 4th heaven of Arhat, his body was always in peak condition. Even if he suffered any injuries, he could quickly recover. There was no need for the blood bodhi. I didn't expect there to be such a surprise this time. Looks like I can sign in at the crop altar a few more times in the future. Su Qin's thoughts fluctuated. After spending almost a year signing in the entire palace, Su Qin found a total of more than a dozen places where he could repeatedly sign in. The crop altar was one of them. While Su Qin was signing in silently in the imperial palace, Chang'an City has long been a chaotic place. Countless martial artists from all over the world gathered here, wanting to witness the battle between 2 peak grade 1 sword Dao great grandmasters. One must know that the battle between the White Cloud City Lord Yi Guqing and Shimen Shueishue in the Emperor of Tang's palace has long been famous. Usually, even a battle between grade 1 great grandmasters is very rare, let alone a peak grade 1 great grandmaster. Now that there was such an opportunity, it naturally attracted many martial artists. In an inn in Chang'an City, many martial artists from all over the world were eating and chatting. Who do you think is stronger between the White Cloud City Lord and Shimen Shueishue? A thin man asked. It's hard to say. Another old man shook his head slightly and said, whether it is the White Cloud City Lord or Shimen Shueishue, they are both peak grade 1 great grandmasters. The outcome of the battle between the two depends on who is faster. When these words came out, the others nodded slightly. If it were the other 2 peak grade 1 great grandmasters, it would take hundreds of moves or even more to determine the winner. Then Yi Guqing and Shimen Shueishue may only need a few moves. Because swordsmen are indomitable and are good at attacking. With one sword, life and death are basically determined. If you can block it, you will live. If you can't block it, you will die. It is rumored that 2 years ago, 2 peak grade 1 great grandmasters fell outside the Emperor of Tang's palace. Yi Guqing and Shimen Shueishue are fighting again. Will the Empire of Tang reap the benefits? The thin man who spoke at the beginning suddenly thought of something and lowered his voice and continued to ask. Haha, when the old man heard this, he smiled and continued. You don't think that there is a legend in the Emperor of Tang's palace, do you? I did think so at the time. The thin man nodded and said. It should be known that defeating a peak grade 1 great grandmaster and killing a peak grade 1 great grandmaster are 2 completely different concepts. A peak grade 1 great grandmaster is not a fool. If they can't win, they will naturally escape. What's more, 2 grade 1 great grandmasters fell outside the Emperor of Tang's palace at that time. You think too much. The old man shook his head and said, what kind of existence is a legend? If the Empire of Tang has a legend, I'm afraid it would have already been publicized. How could there be no movement until now? When the old man said this, the other martial artists around were thoughtful. Yes, if there is a legend standing behind the Empire of Tang, then the Empire of Tang should have begun to unify the countries. Then how do you explain the 2 peak grade 1 great grandmasters who fell outside the imperial city? The thin man seemed to be unable to figure this out and still asked. It's very simple. The old man calmly said, since the Emperor of Tang ascended the throne 2 years ago, Eunuch Zhao has never appeared in the imperial palace. Now many people are guessing that it was Eunuch Zhao who stopped King Wuyang and Yingzhou Bat at that time. In the end, both of them died together. There may be other possibilities, but in any case, with the means of Yi Guqing and Shimen Shueishue, as long as there is no old monster like a legend in the Emperor of Tang's palace, there is nothing to fear. The old man slowly said. So that's how it is. The thin man suddenly understood. The Emperor of Tang's palace. Emperor Li Shang was sitting on the dragon throne. Your Majesty, many martial artists have come to Chang'an City. Do you want me to order them to be driven out? Minister of War bowed and asked. No need. Emperor Li Shang thought for a while and shook his head. The Empire of Tang's current energy should be focused on the night of the full moon. As for the martial artists gathered in Chang'an City at this moment, They are not worth mentioning at all. If the Empire of Tang can block Ye Guqing and Shimen Shueishue, these martial artists will naturally not dare to act recklessly. If the Empire of Tang can't block them, it doesn't make sense to drive those martial artists away. How is the mobilization of the army? Emperor Li Shang asked in a deep voice. Reporting back to your majesty, they are all waiting outside Chang'an city. They are only waiting for your majesty's order to enter the city. Minister of War respectfully said. That's good. Emperor Li Shang nodded slightly, his thoughts drifting. No one knows what he is thinking. Chapter 122. Time passed slowly. Soon it was the night of the full moon. Emperor Li Shang stood on the white jade square. Beside him, there were many red-clothed eunuchs guarding to prevent any accidents. Your Majesty, this place is too dangerous. We can escort your Majesty out of the city quietly. In this way, even if Ye Guqing and Shimen Shueishue really come, they will not threaten your Majesty. Eunuch Lu looked at the sky and whispered. No need. Emperor Li Shang shook his head. The Son of Heaven guards the country. The king dies for the country. If he can't even guard the imperial palace, then there is no point in being the emperor. Since your Majesty has decided so, your Majesty must be safe and sound before this old servant dies. Eunuch Lu said in a deep voice. After a few hours, the sky gradually darkened. A bright moon hung in the sky, releasing bright moonlight. He's here. At this moment, the Forbidden Army commander was shocked and looked at a certain place. He saw a man in white robes standing on top of a palace like an immortal. Just looking at him from a distance, the Forbidden Army commander felt a slight sting in his eyes, as if he was looking at a sharp sword that can cut through everything. White Cloud City Lord Ye Guqing. The Forbidden Army commander looked extremely shocked. He did not expect that Ye Guqing would be so strong. Just by his aura, it was enough to make him a Grade 1 Great Grandmaster, unable to look directly at him. Don't rush to make a move now. Wait for both of them to arrive, then make a move. Emperor Li Shang glanced at the Grade 1 Great Grandmaster beside him and said slowly. Yes. The Forbidden Army commander said in a low voice. After a while, Shimen Shueishue also appeared above a palace, facing Ye Guqing from a distance. You're late. Ye Guqing looked at Shimen Shueishue and said faintly. At their level, whether it is about themselves or the outside world, they have already grasped it to the extreme. Yes. I'm late. Shimen Shueishue admitted frankly. 2 years ago, 2 peak Grade 1 fell here. At that time, I thought that a Grade 1 Great Perfection had appeared here. Shimen Shueishue's eyes turned slightly and scanned the entire Emperor of Tang's palace. But from the looks of it now, there isn't. Shimen Shueishue shook his head slightly. He had been obsessed with the way of the sword since he was young. He had a heart of the sword and could sense any danger that might exist nearby. It was precisely because of his sword heart that he had helped him through countless calamities. However, at this moment, when Shimen Shueishue stood in the imperial palace, his heart of the sword was as calm as ever, without any warning. If there really was a Grade 1 Great Perfection in the imperial palace, then his sword heart should have felt something by now. Although Grade 1 Great Perfection is powerful, as long as it has not transcended the scope of the martial Tao, it cannot escape the perception of the sword heart. Yes, there is no Grade 1 Great Perfection here. White Cloud City's city lord, Ye Guqing, lowered his head and glanced at the ground. He said calmly, looks like before we spar with the sword, we'll have to get rid of some ants. With Ye Guqing's eyesight, he naturally discovered many Grade 1 Great Grandmasters lying in ambush in the imperial palace. Indeed. Think so too. Shimen Shueishue nodded. Although he is obsessed with the sword and has nothing else in his heart except for the sword, he is not a fool. It is impossible for him to give others a chance to injure both sides. This time he and Ye Guqing were discussing the way of the sword. In the end, no matter who survives, they will be seriously injured. At this time, if he was surrounded by a group of Grade 1 Great Grandmasters, his life would be in danger. In that case, make your move. The long sword behind Ye Guqing suddenly let out a sword cry, and then a terrifying sword light gathered and slashed in the direction of the white jade square. Not good. The Forbidden Army commander found that something was wrong and immediately took Emperor Li Shang to retreat in a certain direction. The rest of the Grade 1 Great Grandmasters did the same. Under the sword light of Yi Gucheng, they did not have any thoughts of resisting. The gap is too big. Emperor Li Shang also recovered at this moment. In his eyes, Yi Gucheng, the White Cloud City Lord standing above the palace, and the other Grade 1 Great Grandmasters were on two completely different levels. Emperor Li Shang has not seen a peak Grade 1 Great Grandmaster before. Before the Emperor of Tang died, he had seen Eunuch Zhao's methods. But compared with Eunuch Zhao, the White Cloud City Lord in front of him seems to be much more terrifying. Mobilize the army into the city. Also, all Grade 1 Great Grandmasters start setting up the formation. Emperor Li Shang took a deep breath and issued several orders in a row. Whether it is Yi Gucheng or Shimin Shueishue, neither of them has taken the step to become a legend. Since that is the case, they may be exhausted to death by the sea of people. This is also Emperor Li Shang's last confidence. And at this time, White Cloud City Lord Yi Gucheng frowned slightly, as if he was frowning at the fact that he had to deal with the Grade 1 Great Grandmasters below. Brother Yi, the Emperor of Tang's palace still has a lot of heritage. Shimin Shueishue's voice just fell. Dozens of Grade 1 Great Grandmasters stood in a certain position, constantly changing, forming a huge net, trying to trap Yi Gucheng and Shimin Shueishue. This was also Emperor Li Shang's original plan. He does not expect the dozens of Grade 1 Great Grandmasters to be able to contend against Yi Gucheng and Shimin Shueishue. He only wants to trap the two for a while, wait for the army to enter the city, and then use the sea of people to exhaust the other party. Heritage. White Cloud City Lord Yi Gucheng smiled contemptuously, and slowly pulled out the long sword behind him. Under my sword, everything will be destroyed. The next moment, Wang! A sword light 10 times more terrifying than before condensed, and a terrifying sword intent enveloped the surroundings. At the same time, East Palace Right Spring Square. Su Qin slowly opened his eyes. After a year of cultivation, I finally made some progress. A smile appeared on Su Qin's face. Then, Su Qin seemed to feel something, and raised his head slightly, looking in the direction of the White Jade Square. They really dare to come? Su Qin shook his head. He was immersed in cultivation just now and neglected his perception of the outside world for a while. Since they are here, then stay. Su Qin didn't move. He just raised his right hand and casually released a wisp of sword light towards the White Jade Square. White Jade Square. As White Cloud City Lord Yi Gucheng pulled out the long sword behind him, the entire White Jade Square was filled with extremely fierce sword qi. The Grade 1 Great Grandmasters who had just arranged the Great Array felt their scalps explode, and they could not continue to follow the array. It's over. Emperor Li Shang's heart thumped. The White Cloud City Lord's sword light enveloped the entire White Jade Square, and naturally included him. Emperor Li Shang's original plan was to use dozens of Grade 1 Great Grandmasters to delay Yi Gucheng and Shimin Shueishue with the help of the array, and then let the Patriarch army exhaust the other party. But he did not expect that before the army entered the city, they would already be unable to hold on. Kill for me. White Cloud City Lord Yi Gucheng slowly waved his long sword, and was about to cut down. Suddenly, it was at this moment, the White Cloud City Lord seemed to feel something, and raised his head and looked in a certain direction in the depths of the Imperial Palace. However, with this glance, the White Cloud City Lord Yi Gucheng saw an unforgettable scene. He saw an invisible sword light coming out of nowhere and quickly slashing towards him. The moment he saw this sword light, the White Cloud City Lord Yi Gucheng felt that the heavens and earth immediately began to turn illusory and became unreal. The same was true for his body, his internal strength, and his divine sense. All that was left was a faint and fearful thought as he faced this extremely pure sword light all by himself. Chapter 123. Chang'an City. Imperial Palace. On the White Jade Square. Swish. Yi Gucheng only saw the sword light coming from a certain position in the Imperial Palace, and he felt that his line of sight was completely occupied by it. Everything became illusory, as if he was in an unreal dream. Crack, crack. Cracks appeared on the long sword in Yi Gucheng's hand, which continued to spread and spread to the entire sword in an instant. Brother Yiyu? Not far away, Shimin Chuechua's pupil shrank, and he subconsciously looked in the direction of Yi Gucheng's gaze. That is, Shimin Chuechua did not react. The next moment, then the sword light swept past. Wang! Yi Gucheng and Shimin Chuechua's thoughts began to fall, and they fell into boundless darkness. And at this moment, the Grade 1 Great Grandmasters in the White Jade Square looked on helplessly as the two peak Grade 1 Great Grandmasters fell from the sky and landed on the White Jade Square. It was unknown whether they were dead or alive. Many Grade 1 Great Grandmasters looked at each other. They were at a loss. They had thought of all possibilities just now, and even thought that they would fall under Yi Gucheng's sword. However, no one had expected this to happen even in their wildest dreams. Your Majesty, what should we do now? A deputy commander of the Forbidden Army struggled out of shock and looked at Emperor Li Shang, and couldn't help but ask. Eunuch Lu, go and take a look. Emperor Li Shang thought for a moment, and immediately said, As you wish. Eunuch Lu bowed slightly and began to slowly walk towards the place where Yi Gucheng and Shimin Chuechua fell. The other Grade 1 Great Grandmasters surrounded them. In this way, even if Yi Gucheng and Shimin Chuechua played tricks, they could quickly react and give a thunderous blow in the shortest time. After a while, Eunuch Lu quickly rushed back and whispered to Emperor Li Shang, Your Majesty, they are dead. Dead? Emperor Li Shang was silent. The other Grade 1 Great Grandmasters were also in disbelief. Two peak Grade 1 Great Grandmasters of the Sword Dao died just like that? Your Majesty, perhaps it's the senior who took action 2 years ago? At this moment, the commander of the Forbidden Army suddenly thought of something and said in a low voice. As soon as he said this, Emperor Li Shang's thoughts raced. 2 years ago, Prince Chun colluded with the Southern Ming Empire and fought with King Wuyang and Yinjiu Bat until two peak Grade 1 Great Grandmasters arrived outside the imperial city. At that time, the new Emperor Li Shang was already in despair. No one in the entire imperial palace could stop the two peak Grade 1 Great Grandmasters. However, at that moment the sound of a zither rang out. After the sound of the zither, the song came to an end. The new Emperor Li Shang vaguely sensed that there was a peerless master in the imperial palace, but he had never seen him before, so he could not be sure. We understand. Emperor Li Shang looked pensive. Although he did not know why that peerless expert had been staying in the palace, since the other party had saved the Empire of Tang 3 or 4 times, it was obvious that the other party had a lot of goodwill towards the Empire of Tang. Could it be a living ancestor? Emperor Li Shang guessed in his heart. The Empire of Tang has been established for more than 500 years, and the great ancestor is a legend. It is not impossible for there to be an ancestor hiding in the imperial palace. Okay, you all can leave. Emperor Li Shang pondered for a moment and ordered, As you wish. The Grade 1 Great Grandmasters looked at each other, unable to hide the shock in their hearts, and retreated one after another. They originally thought that today would be a hard battle, and that many Grade 1 Great Grandmasters would fall, but they did not expect things to develop so quickly. After the imperial palace gradually calmed down, the martial artists who came to Chang and City early were suddenly puzzled. Although they came to Chang and City, they could not get close to the imperial palace. They could only feel the aura fluctuations coming from the imperial palace from a distance. The battle between two peak Grade 1 Great Grandmasters, even if it's just a casual aura, is enough to spread throughout the entire Chang and City. These martial artists did not dare to ask to watch the battle between two peak Grade 1 Great Grandmasters face to face. First, because entering Chang and City is already their limit. If they want to get close to the imperial palace, are the Grade 1 Great Grandmasters of the Empire of Tang just decorations? Second, even if the Empire of Tang allowed them to enter the imperial palace to watch the battle, no one would dare to do so. The battle between peak Grade 1 Great Grandmasters is so fierce that even a casual aftershock is enough to kill most martial artists. These martial artists came to watch, but no one is willing to entrust their life and death in the hands of others. However, even if they can't watch the battle between two peak Grade 1 Great Grandmasters, just feeling their aura from a distance is enough to benefit them endlessly. However, what made it difficult for many martial artists to understand was that the aura coming from the imperial palace only lasted for a moment before it completely disappeared. What's going on? Yes, are Yi Gucheng and Shimin Chueshua going to fight? Could it be that they are lying to us? No, what kind of status do Yi Gucheng and Shimin Chueshua have? Since they are going to fight in the imperial palace of the Emperor of Tang, it is impossible for them not to do it. Many martial artists were discussing, their tone puzzled. At this moment, an old man with white hair and beard stood up. Maybe Yi Gucheng and Shimin Chueshua have already arrived. The old man with white hair and beard is a martial artist in the upper realm. As soon as he spoke, the surrounding martial artists quieted down. What do you mean? A martial artist couldn't help but ask. The old man with white hair and beard was silent for a long time before he said a sentence. They are here, but whether they can fight or not is another matter. When these words came out, all the martial artists were shocked. At this moment they all understood what the old man meant. Yi Gucheng and Shimin Chueshua may have been suppressed by someone in the imperial palace of the Emperor of Tang the moment they appeared, and they did not fight at all. There is a great terror in the imperial palace of the Emperor of Tang. The old man with white hair and beard finally said slowly. Many martial artists looked at each other, inexplicably shocked. Imperial Palace. Right Spring Square. After Su Qin casually slashed out a sword light, he no longer cared about what happened in the Imperial Palace. With the sword light he just slashed out, not to mention that Yi Gucheng and Shimin Chueshua were only peak grade 1 who had transformed twice. Even a grade 1 great perfection would not be able to block it. After a year of hard work, I finally took a little step forward. Su Qin sat cross-legged, feeling the changes in his aura. Since Su Qin entered the 4th heavenly layer a year ago, even if he took a lot of innate spirit liquid, blood bodhi, glazed golden core, and other treasures, his strength was still very slow. But just now he had a breakthrough. If the 4th heavenly layer Arhat realm is divided into 3 levels, then Su Qin has entered the 2nd level at this moment. Not bad, not bad. Su Qin nodded slightly, quite satisfied. Immediately afterward, Su Qin slowly got up and walked out of the Right Spring Square. Chapter 124. Although I took a small step, but there is still a distance from peak 4th heavenly layer, Su Qin slowly walked out of the Right Spring Square. His thoughts fluctuated as he thought silently. At this moment, he deeply felt the difficulty of martial Dao cultivation. Even he, who constantly takes various divine pills and spirit medicines, progressed so slowly, let alone the other venerable Arhat and legends. If there is no particularly great opportunity, I'm afraid that they will spend their whole life at the 1st and 2nd heavenly layers, or at most the 3rd heavenly layer. Although there is a distance from peak 4th heavenly layer, according to my current cultivation speed, I can almost reach it in at most 10 years. Su Qin estimated in his heart. Reaching peak 4th heavenly layer in 10 years is based on the premise that Su Qin does not sign in a treasure of a higher level than blood bodhi and innate spirit liquid in the next 10 years. If he signs in a higher level of divine pills and spirit medicines, the 10 years here will be greatly shortened. It's a pity, whether it is innate spirit liquid or blood bodhi, they are all treasures of the Arhat level. Those below Arhat can't take them at all. Su Qin shook his head slightly. Even if it is a grade 1 great grandmaster, if they rashly take innate spirit liquid or blood bodhi, they will only end up exploding and dying. Because the energy in innate spirit liquid and blood bodhi is too huge, far beyond the limit that a grade 9 martial Dao can bear. Time passed slowly. Su Qin returned to his normal life again, signing in every day, cultivating, and occasionally chatting with the Emperor of Tang and Li Shang for a while. As for the family Su, whether it is Su Shimin, Su Sungho, Su Changyu, or Su Qin secretly used Arhat's true essence to change their muscles and cleanse their marrow. In the martial Dao of this world, having sufficient resources was not enough to create a supreme expert. Apart from resources, comprehension ability and temperament were also indispensable. The reason why the dozens of grade 1 great grandmasters in the Emperor of Tang's palace have such achievements is not only because of the support of the resources of the Emperor of Tang's palace, but also because of their own good perception and good temperament. Among the people of the family Su, Su Shimin's vitality began to decline. Coupled with the loss of his drive, even if Su Qin provided more cultivation resources, it would be difficult for him to enter the upper realm. As for Su Sungho and Su Qingyu, they did not have the heart for martial arts. Similarly, Their achievements in martial arts were limited and could not be made up for by cultivation resources. After realizing this, Su Qin did not have much hope for the people of the family Su in the martial Tao, and directly used his true essence to change their muscles and cleanse their marrow. Anyway, even a grade 1 great grandmaster can live for less than 200 years at most. After Su Qin's muscle tendon changing and marrow cleansing, the people of the family Su can live for more than 100 years. The gap is not very big. On this day, Su Qin had just finished his cultivation when the emperor of Tang, Li Shang, and Su Yueyun came to the right spring square with joy. Huh! Su Qin glanced at Su Yueyun, and a smile appeared on his face. Third brother, Yunyang is pregnant. The emperor of Tang, Li Shang's tone was so excited that he almost danced with joy. I see. Su Qin nodded slightly. At first glance when he saw Su Yueyun, he felt another weak life aura in her body. If it weren't for third brother, Yunyang and I are afraid. The emperor of Tang, Li Shang, looked at Su Qin with gratitude. As early as when Su Yueyun first entered the imperial palace, the imperial doctors in the palace found that Yin Qi had entered her body, making it difficult for her to give birth to a dragon child. If it weren't for a prescription written by Su Qin that removed the Yin Qi in Su Yueyun's body, the emperor of Tang, Li Shang, would have to adopt a child from another imperial family. Although the adopted child is also the blood of the imperial family, after all, it is not his own flesh and blood. There is a difference between being close and distant. Soon after a few more words, the emperor of Tang, Li Shang, took Su Yueyun back and prepared to let the imperial doctors brew some tonic soup. In response, Su Qin just smiled. Although Su Yueyun was now in her 30s, if it was an ordinary woman getting pregnant at this age, it would be very dangerous. However, Su Yueyun was a martial artist, and her qi and blood were stronger than ordinary people. Moreover, Su Qin had secretly helped her change her muscles and cleanse her marrow, so it was impossible for anything to go wrong. Time slowly passed. In the blink of an eye, 10 months had passed. On this day, there were palace maids and eunuchs coming in and out of Cunning Palace. The emperor of Tang, Li Shang, was anxiously waiting. Your Majesty. Her Majesty will be fine. Eunuch Lu could not help but whisper. The emperor of Tang, Li Shang, heard this and did not say anything, only shaking his head. Although the imperial doctor said that Su Yueyun's body was very good, and that she had enough qi and blood, there would be no problem giving birth to a dragon child. However, the emperor of Tang, Li Shang, was still worried. How is it? How much longer? The emperor of Tang, Li Shang, looked at a palace maid who had just come out and asked. This little palace maid was obviously shocked. She did not expect the emperor of Tang to ask her personally. She stammered, Your Majesty, don't worry, ma. Her Majesty is doing very well inside. Very well. The emperor of Tang, Li Shang, breathed a sigh of relief. I'm going to be a father soon? The emperor of Tang clenched his fists, full of joy. And at this moment, Su Qin walked out of the right spring square and looked in the direction of Cunning Palace. Little sister. Su Qin took a step and disappeared. When Su Qin appeared again, he was already standing outside Cunning Palace. Your Majesty, Eunuch Lu was about to comfort Li Shang again when he inadvertently glanced at Su Qin, who was standing quietly not far away. This is... Cold sweat quickly emerged on Eunuch Lu's forehead, because before Su Qin appeared, he didn't notice anything at all. As a grade 1 great grandmaster, Eunuch Lu always maintains his perception of the outside world, and no movement can be hidden from him. But just now, from the moment Su Qin appeared until now, Eunuch Lu did not notice anything strange at all. It was as if Su Qin stood there from beginning to end and did not move, like a ghost. What's going on? Eunuch Lu was uneasy, and he almost thought that there was a problem with his cultivation. What's wrong with you? The emperor of Tang, Li Shang, noticed the change in Eunuch Lu and was about to say a few words when he saw Su Qin not far away. Third brother. You're here too. The emperor of Tang, Li Shang, walked in front of Su Qin and immediately said, Just now, the palace maid said that it was going well inside. It should be soon. I know. Su Qin nodded. At this moment, a palace maid rushed out and said loudly, Your Majesty, the Empress gave birth to a boy and a girl, a pair of twins. Is Yuner okay? The Emperor of Tang, Li Shang, immediately walked into the Cunning Palace. Su Qin also followed in. Inside the cunning palace, Su Yueyun was lying on the bed with a pale face. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, was accompanying Su Yueyun at this moment. Third brother Su Yueyun saw Su Qin, squeezed out a smile and was about to speak. "Don't move." Su Qin shook his head slightly, stopped Su Yueyun and walked to the bed. In the next moment, Su Qin flicked his finger, and a trace of Arhat's true essence merged into Su Yueyun's body, slowly nourishing it. Chapter 125. With the influx of true essence into her body, Su Yueyun only felt sleepy and fell asleep in a short while. Russell. Yunyang has suffered. After the Emperor of Tang and Li Sheng accompanied Su Yueyun for a while, they focused their attention on the twins next to them. Su Qin also glanced at them. Huh. Su Qin was surprised. These two children were just born and their skin was wrinkled, but when Su Qin glanced at them, he found that the boy was normal, but the girl had a sense of transparency. Martial Dao genius? Su Qin touched his chin, a thoughtful look in his eyes. Generally speaking, when normal people are born, their meridians are blocked, and the martial Dao cultivation is to slowly open up these blocked meridians. Of course, there are also some people in the world who are born with transparency. If such people embark on the martial Dao, they will advance by leaps and bounds. At least there will be no problem in entering the upper realm. Su Qin didn't expect that Su Yueyun's child would be such a martial Dao genius. However, although Su Qin was surprised, he didn't feel surprised. At Su Qin's level, he has long surpassed the concept of genius. Even a Buddhist heart like Xian Ku is nothing in Su Qin's eyes. For martial artists, having superior qualifications will only make them spend less time on the road of martial Dao cultivation. But whether they can reach the end or even complete the transformation, it is useless to rely on qualifications alone. Su Qin stayed for a while and after confirming that Su Yueyun was fine, he prepared to return to the right spring square. As for the Emperor of Tang and Li Sheng, they were looking at the twins with joy. Su Qin walked out of the cunning palace slowly and stopped when he passed by the white jade square. "It just so happens that I haven't signed in today." Su Qin glanced at the white jade square and said in his heart, "System sign in? Divine ability?" Su Qin's spirit suddenly shook. After signing in for more than 30 years, Su Qin had obtained countless secret manuals, elixirs, natural treasures, and so on. However, there was only one divine ability. It was the Eye of Truth that he obtained from signing in at the Thousand Buddhas Hall. To obtain a divine ability every 30 years, one could see how rare divine abilities were. But now, in front of the white jade square, Su Qin once again obtained a divine ability. "I didn't expect it to be a divine ability." Su Qin's eyes lit up as his thoughts fluctuated. Rebirth of flesh? The introduction of this ability flashed through Su Qin's mind. Flesh and blood rebirth, as the name suggested, was a divine ability related to the physical body. Even if his physical body was shattered, as long as his vital parts were not injured, he could use this ability to quickly recover. What did this mean? Almost half an immortal body. Although venerable Arhat and martial arts legends could regenerate broken limbs, the so-called regenerating of broken limbs was a huge consumption, even for venerable Arhat and martial arts legends. And it required a lot of time to recuperate, from a few months to a few years or even 10 years. And in the end, it even consumed venerable Arhat's origin. But flesh and blood rebirth was different. Not only was the recovery of the physical body far superior to venerable Arhat's regenerating of broken limbs, but its speed was also much faster. With this divine ability and his terrifying physical body, Su Qin's combat strength would at least skyrocket by a level. Ha ha ha. With this divine ability, I have one more trump card. Su Qin was extremely satisfied. Flesh and blood rebirth could not only be used to kill enemies, but also to cultivate. Before obtaining the flesh and blood divine ability, Su Qin cultivated carefully, afraid that he would damage his physical body and plant hidden dangers. But now, with flesh and blood rebirth, even if his physical body was damaged, wouldn't it be solved by using the divine ability to recover once? It's said that above the flesh and blood rebirth, there's another great divine ability, blood rebirth. Su Qin's expression was filled with emotion, and he was fascinated. If flesh and blood rebirth still had vital parts and could only be considered half an immortal body, then blood rebirth was almost immortal. As long as there was a drop of blood left, he could quickly recover. It was comparable to gods, demons, immortals, and Buddhas. Time passed. In the blink of an eye, 3 years had passed. In these 3 years, the Emperor of Tang, Li Shang, had completely stabilized his position on the throne. Through continuously issuing government orders and displaying his strength, he had vaguely brought the Empire of Tang to prosperity. Third brother. On this day, the Emperor of Tang, Li Shang, was still standing outside the Right Spring Square. He waved at Su Qin. Next to the Emperor of Tang, Li Shang, stood a boy and a girl. They were about 3 or 4 years old. Their big eyes were clear and they were very cute. This boy and girl were the Emperor of Tang, Li Shang, and Su Yuyun's children. Now that 3 years had passed, they had grown up a lot. The boy was called Li Yuan and the girl was called Li Wan. Su Qin walked out slowly. Third uncle. Li Yuan and Li Wan called out in unison. Their big eyes were filled with curiosity. Third brother, Yuan, our angered grand tutor again today? The Emperor of Tang, Li Shang, looked at Li Yuan and said helplessly. Father. Li Yuan obviously knew that he was wrong. He lowered his head and didn't dare to say anything. It's normal for children to be naughty. Su Qin didn't care and said casually. Sigh. Of course it's normal for children to be naughty. The Emperor of Tang, Li Shang, sighed and patted Li Yuan's head. But Yuan can't do that. He's my only son, and he's destined to sit on my throne. Any negligence will cause the people to suffer. The Emperor of Tang, Li Shang, shook his head slightly. He still valued Li Yuan, and didn't want Li Yuan to make any big mistakes in the future. There will be people to make mistakes in the future. We just need to live well in the present. Su Qin looked at Li Yuan and said lightly. That's true. The Emperor of Tang, Li Shang, thought that it made sense. He wasn't a god. How could he predict what would happen in the future? Third brother, why don't you be Yuan-er's grand tutor? With your guidance, Yuan-er will definitely be much better. The Emperor of Tang, Li Shang, suddenly thought of something and said with interest. He had long realized that the fearless Li Yuan was afraid of Su Qin. As long as Su Qin was present, Li Yuan didn't dare to do anything overboard. He was as obedient as he could be. The Emperor of Tang, Li Shang, felt that nothing was too strange. Forget it. I'm used to being free and undisciplined. Su Qin rejected without even thinking. He came to the palace to sign in and cultivate, not to teach children how to behave. Besides, Su Qin was. Chapter 126. So I'm already an uncle. Su Qin looked at the Emperor of Tang and Li Shang's backs as they left and couldn't help but laugh. Unknowingly, he had already been in the Emperor of Tang's palace for 5 or 6 years. In these 5 or 6 years, Su Qin had watched the Emperor of Tang and Li Shang change from an uneasy new emperor to a wise ruler who could dictate the imperial court. Bang! In addition, in the past few years, Su Qin has obtained countless heavenly materials, earthly treasures, and spirit pills. What a pity. I'm still a little bit away from reaching the peak of the 4th heaven. Su Qin sighed softly as his thoughts fluctuated. No rush. I still have a lot of time so I can take it slow. Su Qin wasn't anxious at all. Instead, he became calmer and calmer. For Su Qin, he only needed to sign in step by step and he would continue to become stronger. What was there to worry about? Not only was the palace safe, but no one would disturb him. For Su Qin, it was already a holy land for cultivation. In the past few years, I've used most of my sign-in opportunities at the crop altar. I've obtained thousands of blood bodhi and thousands of drops of innate spirit liquid, as well as various other treasures and spirit medicines. According to my current consumption, these are enough for me to use for at least 5 years. Can I place my sign-in opportunities elsewhere? For example, the White Jade Square? Let's see if I can get another divine ability. Su Qin's thoughts fluctuated, and he suddenly had a plan in his heart. At the crop altar, there was a 60% chance of getting innate spirit liquid, 30% chance of getting blood bodhi, and 10% chance of getting other things. Moreover, the amount of innate spirit liquid or blood bodhi obtained each time was different. For example, Su Qin once received 20 drops of innate spirit liquid, and sometimes he only received 1 drop. As for blood bodhi, it was similar, but Su Qin received 12 blood bodhi at most. At the same time, in the longevity hall, The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, looked at the information in his hand with a gloomy expression. I can tolerate it if the vassals don't obey the emperor's orders, but what do they mean by secretly adding fuel to the fire and stopping my orders? The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, said word by word. Your Majesty, please calm down. Your Majesty, please calm down. Many officials knelt on the ground and said loudly, Calm down. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, shook his head slightly and said with a cold expression, If I continue to calm down, this position will be directly given to the kings. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, suddenly stood up and paced back and forth. The vassals of the Empire of Tang had their own troops and were overbearing in their own territories. Li Sheng had long wanted to take action against them. Tell me, how confident are we if we remove the vassals? The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, glanced at the officials and said, Remove the vassals? All the officials were shocked. Removing the vassals was not a joke. The 10 vassals of the Empire of Tang were united. Once Li Sheng touched one of them, it would affect the whole group. At that time, the 10 vassals would rebel together, and the Empire of Tang would be caught in the flames of war. Your Majesty, please be careful about removing the vassals, some officials begged bitterly. The Emperor of Tang. Didn't he know the hidden dangers of the vassals? But why didn't they remove the vassals? It was because they were worried about the consequences of removing the vassals. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, looked at the reactions of the officials and sighed softly in his heart. In fact, he could understand the thoughts of the officials. If the vassals were not removed, the vassals would still stay in their own territories. But once the vassals were removed, the vassals would be forced into a corner. Who could predict what would happen to them? You can all leave. I want to rest for a while. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, waved his hand, lowered his eyes, and sat back on the dragon throne. Since he ascended the throne several years ago, various government decrees have been implemented continuously, which has greatly improved the Empire of Tang. But the more so, the more the hidden dangers of the vassals were revealed. If the Empire of Tang wanted to go further and achieve a true prosperity, it must first solve the problem of the vassals. As long as the vassals existed, the Empire of Tang would be firmly imprisoned in place. As you wish. The officials looked at each other and left the immortal palace one after another. After all the officials left, the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, returned to the right spring square with a pot of wine. Third brother, I'm here again. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, carried a pot of wine and found Su Qin. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, usually did not drink because he felt that wine would affect his thoughts. But today, because of the vassals, he was really depressed and wanted to drink to relieve his worries. Third brother, do you think I'm wrong to remove the vassals? The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, whispered. If he and the 10 vassals compromised, the Empire of Tang could be at peace for a while, but what about after that? The 10 vassals were always a threat to the Empire of Tang. In the future, when the 10 vassals were fully developed and took the initiative to rebel, it would probably be the end of the Empire of Tang. In that case, why not take the initiative to the Empire of Tang? Instead, wait for the vassals to rebel? Removing the vassals is naturally not a problem. Su Qin saw at a glance what the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, was worried about. He said casually, but you need to be prepared for the consequences after removing the vassals. In short, can the Empire of Tang bear the backlash of the 10 vassals? Su Qin's tone was simple, but he directly pointed out the biggest problem of the Empire of Tang. Did they have enough confidence to remove the vassals? Since the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, ascended the throne, the Empire of Tang gradually began to prosper. But to prosper and to prosper were two different things. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, thought for a while and asked, Third brother, do you think that the Empire of Tang is not capable of removing the vassals? You're too anxious. Su Qin shook his head slightly. He had lived in the palace for a long time. Although he was usually too lazy to take care of things, from Su Qin's point of view, the Empire of Tang still needed at least 10 years to accumulate enough foundation before it was qualified to propose removing the vassals. I'm too anxious. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, was thoughtful, and his forehead gradually overflowed with cold sweat. Thank you, third brother, for teaching me. The Emperor of Tang bowed deeply to Su Qin and quickly understood that he had neglected one point. That was he was too anxious. Governing a big country was like cooking a small fish. It needed to be done step by step. If he wanted to achieve it in one step, not only would it not be a good thing, but it might also be a disaster. It's okay, Su Qin replied casually. He just gave the Emperor of Tang a few words. As for what to do, it still depended on the Emperor of Tang's grasp of the situation. By the way, third brother. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, seemed to have thought of something and immediately said, "Yesterday, I went to the National Treasury and found something strange. I still can't figure it out. I invited many people to take a look, but they don't understand it very well. Third brother, you're knowledgeable. You can take a look," the Emperor of Tang said as he put down his wine glass and took out a wooden box from his arms. This wooden box was extremely exquisite. There were faint dark golden patterns on it. It was extremely extraordinary. Su Qin did not care much at first, but the moment he saw the wooden box, his expression froze slightly. His eyes instantly focused on the dark golden patterns on the surface of the wooden box. Chapter 127. This is Heaven and Earth Array? The moment Su Qin's eyes fell on the dark golden patterns on the surface of the wooden box, various thoughts flashed through his mind. The wooden box in the hands of the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, was relatively ordinary. It was carved out of 100-year-old sandalwood. To ordinary people, it might be worth thousands of gold pieces, but compared to the mysterious dark golden patterns on the surface of the wooden box, it was nothing. In Su Qin's eyes, the dark golden patterns on the surface of the wooden box were like a black hole, constantly concealing all the fluctuations around it. Unless Su Qin saw it with his own eyes, even if his divine sense scanned thousands of times, he would not be able to discover the wooden box at all. To be able to inscribe a heaven and earth array on a mere wooden box, this person's strength is probably far beyond that of Tuarahan from 900 years ago. Su Qin's thoughts raced as he thought silently. Before Tuarahan passed away, he had set up a heaven and earth array in his secret chamber to avoid being scanned by others' divine sense. But the heaven and earth array that Tuarahan left behind was based on the stone door outside the secret chamber. The stone door was a few meters wide, enough to set up a heaven and earth array. But this wooden box was only the size of a palm. To inscribe a heaven and earth array on it was extremely difficult. It was not something that a first heaven arhat could do. At least a third heaven. Su Qin guessed in his mind and became more and more curious about this wooden box. Su Qin wanted to know what kind of treasure was worth a third heaven arhat expert's effort to protect it with a heaven and earth array so that it would not be discovered by outsiders. Third brother, are you interested in this? The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, saw Su Qin's expression and asked casually. A little. Su Qin nodded slightly and said. Ever since Su Qin had transmigrated to the present, he had only met two existences at the level of arhat. One was Tuarahan, and the other was the Devil Buddha. Now that he had encountered a third person, how could Su Qin remain indifferent? Since third brother is interested, I'll give it to third brother. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, casually handed the wooden box to Su Qin. By the way, third brother, I heard from the old man guarding the national treasury that this wooden box seems to be related to the great ancestor, but I can't say exactly what it is. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, couldn't help but remind him. Great ancestor? Su Qin narrowed his eyes. When he saw this wooden box, he guessed that it might have been left behind by the great ancestor, the founder of the Empire of Tang, because in the 500 years of the Empire of Tang, only the great ancestor had entered the martial arts legend realm and had the ability to set up the heaven and earth formation. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, said a few more words and left. Su Qin sat cross-legged and looked at the wooden box in front of him quietly. The wooden box had no gaps, as if it was a hole, but when Su Qin gently touched it with his right hand, it suddenly opened. Buzz! An inexplicable wave spread in all directions. If it weren't for the heaven and earth formation in the right spring square, this wave would have spread to the entire palace by now. What a strong divine will! Su Qin frowned slightly and looked at the crystal-clear jade pendant in the wooden box. This jade pendant was transparent, and there was a faint mist rising. But Su Qin felt a lot of divine will waves from the jade pendant. Interesting. Su Qin also released his divine will and approached the jade pendant. Boom! Just when Su Qin's divine will came into contact with the jade pendant, he felt as if he had come to another world. This world was extremely illusory, but in the center, there was a huge figure wearing a dragon robe and standing upright. "Why don't you kneel when you see me?" The figure in the dragon robe slowly raised his head and looked at Su Qin. In an instant, the entire illusory world suddenly boiled. An endless power gathered and suppressed Su Qin. "You dare to attack me with a mere incomplete divine will?" In the face of such a shocking scene, Su Qin's expression did not change at all, because he knew that everything in front of him was just an illusion created by the divine will in the pendant. Perhaps a martial artist who had just entered the martial arts legend realm would be shocked. But for Su Qin, a venerable arhat who was close to level 4 perfected, it was just a reflection of the moon in the water. It would break with a touch. The next moment, Su Qin slowly took a step forward. Suddenly, crack, crack, the entire illusory world seemed to be under some kind of unimaginable pressure, and it began to shatter and dissipate. In a moment it completely collapsed. In the right spring square, Su Qin slowly opened his eyes and looked at the jade pendant in the wooden box with interest. Why did the great ancestor of the Empire of Tang leave such a huge divine will behind? Su Qin touched his chin and his eyes were thoughtful. The divine will in the pendant was so huge that Su Qin wondered if the great ancestor of the Empire of Tang had left most of his divine will here. Unfortunately, through the divine will in the pendant, I have confirmed that the great ancestor of the Empire of Tang should have completely fallen. Su Qin fell into deep thought. If the great ancestor of the Empire of Tang was still alive, the divine will in the pendant would definitely not be as stiff as it was just now. Thinking of this, Su Qin shook his head slightly. More than 500 years ago, the great ancestor of the Empire of Tang established the Empire of Tang and crossed the sea. Since then, there had been no news of the great ancestor of the Empire of Tang for 500 years. If the great ancestor is not dead, this divine will is useless to me. But he has completely fallen, and the divine will in the pendant has become an ownerless object. I can completely refine and absorb it. Su Qin's heart was burning. According to Su Qin's estimation, if he could completely refine the huge divine will in the pendant, he could at least improve his divine will by 5% to 10%. With Su Qin's current strength, it was extremely difficult to improve even a little, let alone 5% to 10%. Moreover, compared to the growth of the body and true essence, it was much more difficult to improve the divine will. The great ancestor of the Empire of Tang left such a huge divine will behind. I'm afraid he left a backup plan. If he fell overseas, could he achieve rebirth through this divine will? Su Qin guessed in his heart. This was the only explanation he could think of. For ordinary people, the death of the body is true death. Even grade 1 great perfection is no exception. But in the eyes of many legends and venerable arhat, the death of the body does not mean complete death. For example, the devil Buddha from 900 years ago abandoned his body and lived for nearly 1,000 years as a demonic will. The great ancestor of the Empire of Tang probably had the same idea as the devil Buddha, leaving such a huge divine will behind as a backup plan after his fall. Unfortunately, even so, the great ancestor of the Empire of Tang still fell, and the divine will he left in the pendant was not activated. Su Qin sighed, and he became more vigilant about the depths of the endless ocean. The great ancestor of the Empire of Tang was a third heavenly layer legend. Even he fell in the depths of the endless ocean, and he did not even have time to activate his backup plan. It can be imagined how terrifying the danger he faced was. Su Qin's strength is far beyond that of the great ancestor of the Empire of Tang, but there is no guarantee that there is no existence in the depths of the endless ocean that is on par with or even surpasses Su Qin. Chapter 128. I still have to be cautious. Su Qin sat cross-legged, his mind fluctuating. Although he has countless trump cards, including the Buddha's palm, the most powerful divine art of Buddhism, it's better not to use them. If one day Su Qin is really forced to use the Buddha's palm, it means that there is no way out. In the end, I'm still not strong enough. If I enter the 9th heaven of Arhat or transcend Arhat, who in the world can threaten me? Su Qin made a decision in his heart. From now on, I have to refine the divine sense in the pendant as soon as possible and transform it into my own strength. Su Qin picked up the jade pendant and merged his divine sense into it, slowly refining the huge divine sense inside. Refining divine sense is different from swallowing pills. Even if the original owner of the divine sense dies, it is still something else. If Su Qin wants to absorb it without any side effects, he needs to refine it bit by bit. Next, Su Qin once again returned to his previous life. However, compared to before, Su Qin spent all his time refining the divine sense in the jade pendant except for signing in. At most 2 months I can almost finish refining it, Su Qin judged in his heart. 2 months in exchange for a 5% to 10% increase in divine sense is definitely worth it. And just as Su Qin was slowly refining the divine sense in the jade pendant, "Third uncle, we're here." Outside the right spring square a young voice came. Su Qin looked up and saw the 2 children of the Emperor of Tang, Li Yuan and Li Yuan, standing outside. Beside Li Yuan and Li Yuan, a personal eunuch and a palace maid were standing with their backs bowed. It was obvious that they were the ones who had brought the 2 of them here. "Why are you here?" Su Qin walked out of the right spring square and asked casually. "Third uncle, it's too boring in the palace," Li Yuan said in a clear voice. Why aren't you saying anything?" Li Yuan turned around and looked at Li Yuan, who was hiding behind her. He dragged him in front of Su Qin and said, "Third uncle, father asked us to visit you often." "Third uncle." Li Yuan braced himself and said. For some reason Li Yuan, who had always been fearless and dared to pull on the Grand Tutor's beard, felt fear in his heart when he saw Su Qin. The Emperor of Tang. Su Qin shook his head slightly. Although he had directly rejected the Emperor of Tang's proposal and didn't want to have too much to do with Li Yuan and Li Yuan, it was clear that the Emperor of Tang still wanted his children to be closer to Su Qin. "Third uncle, I always feel that your place is so comfortable, more comfortable than any other place in the palace," Li Yuan blinked and said. "Really?" Su Qin didn't feel the slightest bit strange. Li Yuan was a martial arts genius. His innate meridians were clear, and he could faintly feel the fluctuations of heaven and earth essence qi. Su Qin's residence, the right spring square, had countless heaven and earth arrays. Although these heaven and earth arrays didn't have the effect of gathering heaven and earth essence qi, they could still attract some essence qi. That was why Li Yuan felt a little different. "Do you like martial arts?" Su Qin glanced at Li Yuan and asked casually. "Martial arts? Are you talking about those eunuchs flying around?" Li Yuan's eyes lit up and he immediately said, "Of course Wanner likes it. If you like it, you can tell your father that you want to practice martial arts." Su Qin looked at Li Yuan and said lightly, "With Li Yuan's martial arts talent, it would be a pity if he didn't practice martial arts." However, Su Qin didn't intend to teach Li Yuan martial arts personally. There were so many martial artists in the palace, and there were even dozens of grade 1 great grandmasters. Su Qin didn't need to do anything. After a while, Li Yuan and Li Yuan were taken back by the eunuchs and maids. After Li Yuan and Li Yuan left, Su Qin's heart suddenly moved, and he looked up in a certain direction. "The brand is about to dissipate. When I finish refining the divine sense, I will take some time to go to Nanzhao." Su Qin's eyes were calm, and he thought silently in his heart. A few years ago, the people of Nanzhao's moon worship tried to control Su Sung-ho with witchcraft. At that time when Su Qin found out, he directly killed the person who released the witchcraft, and split a sword light to form a brand on another person, so as to lock his position. Finally, he obediently led the way for Su Qin. Now that a few years have passed, the other party has returned to Nanzhao's moon worship early, and Su Qin should also go there. Since the moon worship dared to reach out to his family Su, they should be prepared to be exterminated. In the past few years, I have seen from many ancient books collected in the imperial palace that the moon god of the moon worship seems to be a bit strange. Su Qin touched his chin, a thoughtful look in his eyes. However, although Su Qin was curious in this regard, he was not too worried. The moon god of the moon worship is not simple, but it is impossible for him to reach the level of a legend. Otherwise, moon worship would have already shocked the world. Why would they stay in this small corner of Nanzhao? No matter what it is, I will know when I go and take a look. Thinking of this, Su Qin began to slowly refine the huge divine sense in the jade pendant again. 2 months passed in the blink of an eye. On this day, Su Qin slowly opened his eyes, and a trace of inexplicable aura appeared and disappeared in an instant. In front of Su Qin, cracks began to appear on the surface of the crystal-clear jade pendant. After these cracks appeared, they quickly spread and split, covering the entire jade pendant in the blink of an eye. Then, crack, the jade pendant suddenly turned into powder. This jade pendant originally existed to carry the huge divine sense of the great ancestor of the Empire of Tang. Now that the divine sense has disappeared, the jade pendant will naturally disappear. It's about time. Su Qin got up and walked out of the right spring square. Su Qin did not intend to tell anyone about his trip to Nanzhao. With his speed, it would take at most a year to travel from Nanzhao to Chang, or even half a day if everything went well. There was no need to tell anyone about such a short time. However, before leaving, Su Qin returned to the family Su and separated a few strands of divine sense to attach to the family Su. When Su Qin was in Chang'an, his divine sense enveloped the entire city at all times, so the family Su was absolutely safe. But now Su Qin was leaving Chang, and going to Nanzhao. Even if the time was short, it was impossible not to make any preparations. With Su Qin's current strength, even if it was just a strand of divine sense, it was enough to suppress the world. Even if a martial arts legend were to attack, it would be able to delay for a while, enough for him to rush back. As for the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, and Su Yueyun, Su Qin also separated a strand of divine sense to them. Although Su Yueyun had the jade pendant that Su Qin gave her, it also contained a strand of divine sense. But after all, the divine sense in that jade pendant was divided by Su Qin before he entered the martial arts legend realm. It was far less useful than the current divine sense. I'll leave a sign in opportunity. Maybe I can use it at moon worship. Su Qin chose to leave the sign in opportunity of that day. If he could sign in at moon worship, Su Qin would sign in at moon worship. If not, Su Qin could still rush back to the palace before tomorrow. Time passed. Just before dawn, Su Qin walked out of the palace. Chapter 129. Nanzhao was located in the southwest of the Tang dynasty, and was tens of thousands of miles away from Chang'an City. For ordinary people, it may take 10 years or even decades to cover such a long distance or even a lifetime. But in Su Qin's eyes, it was only a matter of hours. And this was under the premise that Su Qin was traveling slowly. Otherwise, if he went all out with the speed of Venerable Arhat, it would take him at most 2 hours. Although Nanzhao was one of the countries, it was far inferior to the Empire of Tang in terms of national strength. Moreover, most of the areas in the territory were undeveloped, and the atmosphere was desolate and the people were tough. In Nanzhao, moon worship was supreme. Even the Emperor of Nanzhao was a disciple of moon worship, and performed the etiquette of a father to the moon worshippers. At the same time, outside the 100,000 mountains of Nanzhao, Su Qin stood there quietly, looking into the depths of the 100,000 mountains. There it is. Su Qin's thoughts fluctuated as he silently thought in his heart. According to the location he had locked onto, the sword light mark he planted stopped in the depths of the 100,000 mountains. Thinking of this, Su Qin took a step and disappeared. When he reached the depths of the 100,000 mountains and was more than 20 miles away from the mark he had locked onto, Su Qin slowed down and walked step by step. The reason why Su Qin did this was that he wanted to confirm if there was a place nearby that matched the system's sign-in, and also to check the various auras of the 100,000 mountains with the eye of truth. Although Su Qin didn't think that moon worship was a threat to him, it was always better to be cautious. Just as Su Qin walked along the mountain road unhurriedly, on another mountain road not far away, 5 or 6 figures suddenly walked out. Of these 5 to 6 figures, other than the leader who was a middle-aged man, the rest were all teenagers. At this moment, these young men and women were looking around curiously. Su Qin was not surprised. He had already noticed the presence of this group of people, but the other party did not think so, especially the middle-aged man. When he saw Su Qin, his expression changed slightly. "Are you also going to moon worship?" The middle-aged man hesitated for a moment before asking cautiously. "Yes," Su Qin said casually as he walked. Other than the middle-aged man who had some inner strength and could barely be considered a martial artist, the rest of the young men and women were just ordinary people. "That's good. We're on the way." The middle-aged man heaved a sigh of relief and said in a friendly manner, "I'm a warrior from the nearby Qingyang town. These are the disciples that our town sent to moon worship this year." The middle-aged man blurted out everything he knew without hesitation. The middle-aged man's name was Hong Fei, and he was from Qingyang town outside the 100,000 Mountains. According to him, the reason he entered the 100,000 Mountains this time was to send disciples to moon worship. Moon worship was the national religion of Nanzhao, and its status was even higher than that of the king. Therefore, every year, a large number of Nanzhao citizens would send their children to moon worship. Once selected by moon worship and entered the saint sect, they would definitely soar to the sky. This was the purpose of the middle-aged man this time. He brought all the eligible young men and women in his town and sent them to moon worship. As long as one of them was selected, the impact on Qingyang town would be unprecedented. "You must be a martial artist who wants to visit the saint sect, right?" The middle-aged man, Hong Fei, glanced at Su Qin and asked tentatively. Su Qin's aura was restrained, and there was no difference between him and an ordinary person. But if he was an ordinary person, how would he dare to come to the 100,000 Mountains? Therefore, in the eyes of the middle-aged man Hong Fei, Su Qin must be a powerful martial artist. In fact, it was not rare for martial artists like Su Qin to appear in the 100,000 Mountains. There were many of them every year, and their purpose was to visit the saint sect. Su Qin heard him and did not bother to answer. Seeing this, the middle-aged man, Hong Fei, became more and more convinced of his judgment. Su Qin must have a request for moon worship, so he came to the 100,000 Mountains specifically to visit the saint sect. However, Su Qin did not speak, and the middle-aged man, Hong Fei, did not dare to continue talking. He led the young men and women behind him and followed Su Qin. "Let me tell you, when you enter the saint sect later, don't look around. If you disturb any of the saints, it will be a disaster for our Qingyang town," the middle-aged man warned the young men and women. "Uncle Hong, is moon worship that good?" At this moment, a young man with a strong head could not help but ask. "It's more than good." The middle-aged man, Hong Fei, shook his head and said, "A few years ago, a disciple of moon worship wanted to go to the capital. In the end, before the disciple arrived, the king and many ministers were already waiting outside the capital to welcome him. Tell me, is it good or not?" When the middle-aged man, Hong Fei, said this, the young man who asked the question immediately shrunk his head and did not dare to say another word. The other young men and women were also shocked. For them, the highest status person they had ever seen was the mayor of the town. As for the king of Nanzhao, he was a legendary figure. But now, it seemed that the so-called king of Nanzhao was nothing in front of the saint sect. Then what should we do?" A beautiful young woman asked timidly. "Do whatever the saint sect asks you to do." The middle-aged man, Hong Fei, said seriously, "Remember, don't have any ulterior motives." "Got it. I'll remember it too." The young men and women quickly agreed. "Consider yourself lucky." The middle-aged man, Hong Fei, suddenly thought of something and smiled. "Recently, the saint sect has been worshipping the moon god, so the requirements for disciples have been relaxed. Otherwise, you won't even be able to enter the saint sect, let alone become a disciple." When the middle-aged man, Hong Fei, said this, his face was full of emotions. Worshipping the moon god? Su Qin, who was walking at a steady pace in front, was slightly moved. Before he came, he had read from the ancient books that moon worship would worship the moon god once every 10 years. Worshipping the moon god is the most solemn day of moon worship. On this day, all disciples will return to the saint sect. It's a good time to settle it once and for all, so that there won't be any revenge in the future. Su Qin thought silently in his heart. For hours later, after a long mountain road, Su Qin finally arrived outside the moon worship. At this time, Su Qin was at the top of a mountain, and in front of him was an iron chain that spanned across 2 mountains. As for the moon worship, it was located on the other side of the iron chain, a full 10 miles away. "We're here. That's the moon worship." The middle-aged man, Hong Fei, let out a sigh of relief and pointed to the other side of the iron chain. What a spectacular sight! The young men and women opened their eyes wide and muttered to themselves. Chapter 130. This point, Many boys and girls on the field could only vaguely see the towering moon worship temple standing on the top of the mountain 10 miles away. But even so, a majestic and desolate aura continued to rise, as if illuminating the 100,000 mountains. The middle-aged man, Hong Fei, was full of awe. He glanced at the boys and girls and whispered, "We just need to wait here now. Remember, don't take a step forward." The middle-aged man, Hong Fei, warned with a serious expression. Yes. Several boys and girls subconsciously took a few steps back. Moon worship really knows how to choose a place. Su Qin's eyes were calm as he looked at moon worship. Moon worship was surrounded by cliffs on all sides. As long as they guard the only way, even if they are besieged by millions of troops, they will be safe. As for the martial artists, unless it is a group of upper realm martial artists who rush to the moon worship temple regardless of life and death, no matter how many ordinary martial artists there are, it will be useless. Because they can't touch moon worship at all. Su Qin thought as he opened Eyes of Truth. Suddenly, in the moon worship 10 miles away, auras appeared one after another. These auras were strong or weak, similar to martial artists, but they also revealed other strange auras. The disciples of moon worship are not martial artists. They cultivate witchcraft and curses, using voodoo insects as the foundation to kill people invisibly. Su Qin looked at the auras in moon worship and thought silently. However, in the entire moon worship, only 2 auras have reached grade 1. It's nothing to worry about. Su Qin observed for a moment and had a general understanding of moon worship. But why don't I notice the aura of moon god? Su Qin frowned slightly. He looked at the entire moon worship with Eyes of Truth, but he didn't find the so-called moon god at all. In order to be foolproof, Su Qin continued to observe with Eyes of Truth, for a while until he confirmed all the trump cards of moon worship. He shook his head slightly. Forget it. There's no need to waste time. Su Qin's thoughts fluctuated as he took a step forward. Hong Fei, the middle-aged man not far away, was shocked when he saw this scene. He immediately dissuaded. Your Excellency, this is the Holy Moon Church. Our every move is under the watch of the Holy Moon Church. Please be cautious. The middle-aged man, Hong Fei, thought that Su Qin was impatient and wanted to follow the chain to the moon worship center. This behavior seemed normal, but in fact it was a provocation to moon worship. The middle-aged man, Hong Fei, knew the rules of moon worship very well. No matter who it was, even if it was a king, they had to wait patiently. However, anyone who violated this rule would be hunted down by the entire moon worship. With the influence of the moon worship in Nanzhao, coupled with the strange and unpredictable witchcraft curses, anyone who was hunted down by them would die. However, the next moment, under the incredulous gaze of the middle-aged man, Hong Fei, Su Qin stretched out his right hand, slowly raised it, and pressed it toward the moon worship center from 10 miles away. In an instant, the wind on the top of the mountain seemed to stop, and a dark golden Buddha palm covered the world. Moon worship. In a majestic and tall temple, the moon worshippers and the elders sat cross-legged, looking silent as if they were troubled by something. A few years ago, our saintess fell in Chang, and of the empire of Tang. At this time, the moon worshippers suddenly stood up, looked down at the elders and said in a deep voice. As soon as these words came out, the hearts of all the elders present trembled. A few years ago, the moon worship deliberately sent the saintess to Chang, and in order to set up a trap in the empire of Tang, they wanted to plant a nail in the Li royal family. However, everyone, including the moon worshippers, didn't expect that the saintess not only failed to complete the mission of the saint sect, but also died in Chang'an City. Moreover, according to the white-haired old woman who came back from Chang'an City alive, the saintess died in a sword light that came from the sky. Not only did the saintess die, but even the most ancient venomous insect in the entire moon worship was also cut into nothingness. When this news reached the ears of the elders and the sect leader, everyone felt as if they had been struck by lightning. Although they didn't know who had cut the sword light, they knew very well that the other party was not someone that the moon worship could deal with. Even in the following years, the moon worship was trembling in fear, fearing that one day the other party would come to their door. Sect leader, why did you mention this? An elder couldn't help but ask. The other elders heard this and also looked at the moon worshippers. The saintess did fall in Chang'an City, but so what? According to what the white-haired old woman said at that time, the person who did it was at least a peak grade 1 great grandmaster. It was far from what the moon worship could deal with. The vitality of a peak grade 1 great grandmaster is enough to ignore all witchcraft curses. What I want to say is, the moon worshippers paused and continued, the saint sect is about to take revenge with their own hands. What? Many of the elders were puzzled and puzzled. Revenge? How can the saint sect take revenge? The other party didn't even show their face and cut the most ancient venomous insect of the saint sect into nothingness. How can they take revenge? Just as the elders were in a state of shock and uncertainty, the moon worshipper said slowly, I have learned the will of the moon god. After this sacrifice, the moon god will manifest in the world. When these words came out, the faces of all the elders changed. The moon god will manifest in the world. This sect master, is what you said true? The voice of an elder trembled as he looked at the moon worshippers with great excitement. Of course, the moon worshippers nodded slightly, and their tone was also full of fanaticism. In the eyes of all the moon worship disciples, the moon god is invincible. As long as the moon god takes action, no one in the world can stop their moon worship. Ha ha ha. With the protection of the moon god, why would the saint sect hide in Nanzhao? Yes, no matter who killed the saintess, just wait for death obediently. Sect master, it is better for the saint sect to start gathering disciples now. When the moon god manifests in the world, we will kill our way to Chang and city and avenge the saintess. Many elders began to clamor. When the moon worshippers heard this, they waved their hands and said, it is only a matter of time before we kill our enemies. Soon the saint sect will rule the world. Every word of the moon worshippers was filled with strong confidence. Just as the elders and the sect master were discussing how to torture the person who killed the saintess, suddenly there was a commotion outside. What's going on? The moon worshippers frowned. The other elders also looked dissatisfied. They were just looking forward to the future, but they were interrupted. Let's go out and take a look. The moon worshippers faintly felt that something was wrong. They directly got up and walked out of the hall. The elders looked at each other and could only follow behind the sect master. However, when the moon worshippers walked out of the holy temple, they found that all the disciples were looking at the sky with incomparable horror. The moon worshippers and the elders suppressed the doubts in their hearts and raised their heads to look at the sky. The next moment, the moon worshippers saw a scene that they would never forget for the rest of their lives. They saw a glass Buddha palm that spanned across the void, blooming with endless pure light, exuding a posture that encompassed heaven and earth. The glass Buddha palm became bigger and bigger, as if it came from above the 9 heavens. A sacred, solemn, pure, and heavy aura instantly suppressed down. At this moment the sky darkened. Chapter 131. Outside the holy sanctum, the moon worshippers and the elders trembled as they stared in disbelief at the Buddha's palm that was slowly falling from the sky. What is that? The moon worshippers were shocked as they felt a terrifying pressure suddenly descending. Under this pressure, all the disciples in the holy sanctum couldn't help but kneel down, not daring to look directly at the Buddha's palm that was shrouding heaven and earth. Even the elders of the holy sanctum were forced to bend their backs. Only the moon worshippers and the other holy emissary were barely holding on, but it was obvious that with the continuous pressure of the dark golden Buddha's palm, they wouldn't be able to hold on for long. In the blink of an eye, the moon worshippers finally broke free from the shock. They realized that if they continued like this, they would be crushed by the Buddha's palm in a few seconds at most. Run! The moon worshippers' eyes were red as they frantically burned their blood essence. Even the life-venomous worm in their body was alarmed as it let out a sharp cry. Screech! A pale golden shadow of a venomous worm appeared behind the moon worshippers. Suddenly, the moon worshippers' aura began to soar as if there was no end to it. Crack! The moon worshippers stepped on the ground fiercely as their bodies turned into phantoms and leaped out of the holy sanctum. In addition to the moon worshippers, the other holy emissary also did the same. He desperately broke free from the pressure of the Buddha's palm and fled in the opposite direction of the moon worshippers. Whether it was the moon worshippers or the holy emissary, they didn't even think about the elders and other disciples of the holy sanctum. because they knew very well in their hearts that under this glazed Buddha palm, the Holy Moon Church was finished, completely and utterly finished. Want to run? Su Qin, who was 10 miles away, saw this scene and shook his head slightly. He didn't care at all. His palm wasn't the real Buddha's palm. It was just a simulation of the concept. But even so, it wasn't something that any 9th-grade martial artist could resist. As expected, the moon worshippers and the other saint who had escaped suddenly realized that under the suppression of the glazed Buddha palm, even though they had broken free and regained their mobility, their speed was as slow as a tortoise's. According to their current speed, it would take them several days to escape from the moon worship. And in just a few days, not to mention a few days, even if it was just a few seconds, moon worship would be crushed several times by the glazed Buddha palm. No! Under the despairing gazes of the moon worshippers, the saint and countless other disciples, the dark golden glazed Buddha palm came crashing down. At this moment everything shattered. The entire moon worship temple collapsed and turned into dust, completely disappearing from the world. If someone were to look from a distance, they would find that a section of the mountain where the Holy Moon Church was located had been cut off, and on the mirror-like surface of the mountain, there was a faint imprint of a Buddha's palm that could penetrate heaven and earth, from beginning to end. From the leader of the moon worship sect to the many disciples, no one knew what had happened. It's over. Su Qin's eyes were calm, and his thoughts were unruffled. Although the moon worship sect had a supreme status in Nanzhao, in fact, its actions were no different from those of the demon sect. Wantonly killing, using living beings as sacrifices to the moon god. These were as simple as drinking water and eating in the eyes of the moon worship sect. The Buddha's palm is powerful, but for me now, if I want to really use it, I'm afraid I'll need to use at least 60% of my true essence and divine will. Su Qin roughly estimated in his mind. His palm just now was just a simulation of the real Buddha's palm. But Su Qin also had a rough idea of how much energy he would need to use the Buddha's palm. At this moment the middle-aged man Hong Fei, who was about to persuade Su Qin, stood there dumbfounded. The boys and girls next to him were also dumbfounded, their faces full of disbelief. They looked at Su Qin and the moon worship sect that had been completely reduced to dust with terrified eyes. The saint sect. The saint sect is gone. The middle-aged man Hong Fei's teeth were chattering, and he almost thought he was dreaming. The moon worship sect had dominated Nanzhao for hundreds of thousands of years. Even the lords of Nanzhao treated the disciples of the saint sect with respect. To some extent, moon worship sect could replace Nanzhao with just a thought. The middle-aged man Hong Fei would never have dreamed that the supreme moon worship sect in his eyes would one day be destroyed by a palm. Thinking of this, the middle-aged man Hong Fei stiffened. He looked at the figure not far away and stood there respectfully, not daring to have any thoughts, because he knew in his heart that even a giant like the moon worship sect was like an ant in the hands of Su Qin, let alone them. You can go. Su Qin glanced at the middle-aged man Hong Fei and said casually. The middle-aged man Hong Fei was not a member of the moon worship sect. As for the boys and girls beside him, they did not have the time to join the saint sect. Although Su Qin can destroy the Holy Moon Church with a raise of his hand without frowning, he will not kill innocent people. Su Qin destroyed the moon worship sect because the moon worship sect provoked him first. Yes, we will go now. When the middle-aged man Hong Fei heard Su Qin's words, it was as if he had been granted amnesty. He immediately took the young boys and girls next to him and respectfully retreated. When they were some distance away from Su Qin, they fled without looking back. The middle-aged man suddenly had a thought in his mind. The moon worship sect has suppressed Nanzhao for hundreds of thousands of years. Now that it has been destroyed, the impact on Nanzhao is far-reaching. After the middle-aged man Hong Fei and the others left, Su Qin took another look at the mountain where the moon worship sect was originally located, and was ready to return to the empire of Tang. However, just then, Su Qin's expression changed slightly, and he released a huge amount of divine sense in an instant. Interesting. There was an inexplicable look on Su Qin's face, and he took a step forward and disappeared. When Su Qin reappeared, he was already standing on the mountain where the moon worship sect was originally located. Before the moon worship sect was destroyed, this position was a certain position deep in the holy temple. At this moment, not far from Su Qin, a jade statue about the height of a person stood there quietly. The jade statue is a woman. Her face is hazy and cannot be seen clearly. One can only vaguely recognize that there is a faint full moon mark on the jade statue's eyebrows. If it was an ordinary person, even a grade 1 great grandmaster seeing this jade statue, although they would be surprised why the jade statue was so lifelike, they would not think much about it. After all, no matter how lifelike a jade statue is, it is just a jade statue. It has no life. At most its value is a little higher, but for a martial artist it is nothing at all. However, Su Qin took a closer look at the jade statue. After a while, a smile appeared on his face, and he said, "You don't want to come out now, do you want me to do it?" Chapter 132. Why don't you come out now? Are you waiting for me to make a move? Su Qin's voice rang out. At this time there was no one around him, as if he was talking to the air. However, a moment later, the jade statue not far from Su Qin suddenly emitted a faint light, and then an illusory figure appeared. "Greetings, fellow Taoist." The illusory figure wore a palace dress and looked pure, but there was an indescribable charm in every part of her. White skin, graceful figure. Are you the moon god worshipped by the moon-worshipping cult? Su Qin looked at the illusory figure with interest. In Su Qin's eyes, the illusory figure in the palace dress was just a strand of divine sense of a certain martial arts legend. But it was different from the divine sense left in the jade pendant by the founder of the Empire of Tang. The other party was not without a master, but had her own consciousness. "Moon god, you flatter me." The figure in the palace dress sighed and said, "I just want to live. The world is unfair. Even if you become a martial arts legend, you can only live for 500 years, Shouyuan. Once 500 years have passed, no matter how strong you are, you will disappear." At this point, the figure in the palace dress paused for a while and continued, "There is a way to live forever overseas, but it can only extend one's life by 100 or 200 years at most. If you want to live forever, you have to transcend the 9 heavens legends and become an earth immortal. Have you been overseas?" Su Qin looked at the figure in the palace dress and suddenly became interested. Originally, Su Qin planned to directly destroy the illusory figure, and then return to the Emperor of Tang Palace as soon as possible. But seeing that the figure in the palace dress seemed to know something about overseas, he was not in a hurry for the time being. Anyway, the figure in the palace dress was right in front of him. With Su Qin's ability, even if she recovered to her peak, she might not be his opponent, let alone now when she was only left with a strand of divine sense. Since Su Qin attained the Arhat fruit, he had heard of overseas more than once, but he had not seen much specific information. It was as if to all martial arts legends or venerable Arhat, overseas was a taboo that they could not talk about. 300 years ago I once crossed the sea. In the depths of the endless sea, the heaven and earth Yuan Qi was abundant. Compared to this continent, that place was like another world. As the beautiful figure in the palace dress spoke, she seemed to have fallen into some kind of memory. Unfortunately, even with the favorable environment in the depths of the endless ocean, the last land immortal that appeared was 1,000 years ago. Land immortal. Su Qin's thoughts fluctuated. Earth immortal was the realm after martial arts legend. It was said that Earth immortals had a lifespan of more than 1,000 years. They were indeed no different from real immortals. Do you mean that even overseas there are no land immortals? Su Qin asked. At least that's what I understand. The beautiful figure in the palace dress shook her head and said, "There are many experts in the sea, but no one knows about the immortals of the land. There aren't even any rumors about it." The beautiful figure in the palace dress sighed. "I even began to doubt whether the so-called land immortal realm really exists. The last land immortal that appeared 1,000 years ago was probably just a rumor." The beautiful figure in the palace dress tone was filled with despair. Any martial artist who stepped into the martial arts legend realm was 1 in a billion. Since they were young, they had overcome all obstacles and swept the world, invincible for an era. But in the end they were forcefully trapped in the martial arts legend realm, unable to move forward and facing death alone. One could imagine the torment. I see. Su Qin was deep in thought. Although he had never been overseas, he guessed that what the beautiful figure in the palace dress said should be true. No matter how abundant the heaven and earth Yuanqi was overseas, and no matter how many treasures there were, how could it compare to Su Qin? Not to mention other things, just the primordial spirit liquid and blood Bodhi alone were probably scarce overseas. But Su Qin could eat them like candy every day. In addition to these two treasures, there were also a lot of other cultivation resources. But even so, Su Qin was still stuck in the fourth heavenly layer for several years, let alone the overseas martial arts legends. Therefore, if there were martial artists overseas who surpassed Su Qin, such as fifth heavenly layer or sixth heavenly layer legends, Su Qin would believe it. After all, those who were close to the end of the Shouyuan and had lived for almost 500 years could indeed reach this realm. But if there were land immortals who were completely above the martial arts legends, Su Qin would not believe it. Martial arts legends had a total of 500 years of Shouyuan, so how could they enter the land immortal realm? Of course, Su Qin was an exception. Although Su Qin was not a land immortal, he had the same Shouyuan as the land immortals and could live for 1,000 years. Fellow Taoist, just as Su Qin was thinking, the beautiful figure in the palace dress suddenly looked at Su Qin with a soft and pitiful gaze. I have lost my physical body, and only a strand of my divine sense is left. I am alone and have no one to rely on, so I hope fellow Taoists can take me in. The beautiful figure in the palace dress voice was soft, and a trace of an extremely charming aura began to spread. Don't worry, although I am useless, I was once a martial arts legend, so I still know some things about martial arts cultivation. Moreover, before I fell, I hid the treasures I obtained in a certain place. As long as fellow Taoist agrees, I will give you all my treasures. The beautiful figure in the palace dress words were full of fatal temptation. No matter what, the beautiful figure in the palace dress was still a martial arts legend. Her understanding of martial arts cultivation was a priceless treasure for any martial arts 9th grade martial artist, and it could save them a lot of detours. Even in the eyes of martial arts legends of the same level, it was a great reference. As for the treasures of a lifetime, it was even more amazing. What did it mean to have the treasures of a martial arts legend? Oh, is there such a good thing? A smile appeared on Su Qin's face as he looked at the beautiful figure in the palace dress. Of course, the beautiful figure in the palace dress was already within 5 meters of Su Qin without him noticing. As long as fellow Taoist, as the beautiful figure in the palace dress said this, her illusory figure suddenly blurred, and instantly turned into a stream of light, and rushed into Su Qin's forehead. Ha 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 ha. You fell for my trick, didn't you? The beautiful figure in the palace dress voice rang in Su Qin's ears, and there was a hint of pride in it. From beginning to end, the beautiful figure in the palace dress had never thought of asking Su Qin to take her in. Instead, she was prepared to take over Su Qin's body. If Su Qin had remained vigilant and not let the beautiful figure in the palace dress get within 5 meters of him, no matter how capable the beautiful figure in the palace dress was, she would not have been able to do anything to Su Qin. However, the beautiful figure in the palace dress first used the information she knew about overseas as bait, and pretended to be harmless to lower Su Qin's vigilance. Finally, she lured him with treasures and successfully got within 5 meters of Su Qin. At this point, the beautiful figure in the palace dress plan was already more than half complete. Although I've been sleeping for hundreds of years, I've been using offerings to nourish my divine sense. Coupled with the fortuitous encounter overseas, my divine sense is stable and indestructible. I can't possibly possess a martial artist who has just entered the myth realm. The beautiful figure in the palace dress thoughts spun rapidly, and she was full of confidence. In her opinion, Su Qin had not even been overseas, and should have just entered the martial arts legend realm. At most, he was hovering around the second heaven, and could not possibly resist the invasion of her divine sense. Once I successfully occupy this body and have the power to protect myself, I'll be able to act freely in some matters. When the beautiful figure in the palace dress thought of this, a hint of excitement rose in her heart. Although after occupying Su Qin's body, she would have to change from a woman to a man, but as long as she could survive, what was the price to pay? Buzz! The beautiful figure in the palace dress divine sense quickly surged into Su Qin's forehead, and then into his ancestral aperture. However, before the beautiful figure in the palace dress could make her next move, her eyes widened, and she looked at everything in front of her with incomparable shock. In the depths of the ancestral aperture, A giant golden Buddha stood quietly in the center of the world. It was infinitely huge, and its fingers touched the sky and the earth. It filled her vision, as if there was nothing more noble than it. The Buddha's light spread, illuminating the darkness and enveloping the void. Chapter 133. This is. The figure in the palace dress trembled as she looked in disbelief at the giant golden Buddha in the depths of her ancestral aperture. The Buddha's light spread. Crack, crack. The figure in the palace dress felt her divine sense collapsing and dissipating. It was as if just looking at the giant golden Buddha was something she could never bear. Impossible. The figure in the palace dress felt as if her heart had fallen into an abyss. She had once traveled overseas and saw a fifth heaven divine realm martial artist from afar. At that time, that fifth heaven divine realm martial artist was no different from heaven and earth to the figure in the palace dress. But now the figure in the palace dress subconsciously compared that fifth heaven divine realm martial artist to the giant golden Buddha in front of her, but found that the two were not on the same level at all. For this giant golden Buddha that filled heaven and earth, let alone a mere fifth heaven divine realm martial artist, even a true earth divine realm martial artist was like an ant. I never thought that I would one day fall in the hands of such a great existence. Just as the figure in the palace dress had this thought, under the illumination of the Buddha's light, the figure maintained by her divine sense completely collapsed and disappeared. Outside, Su Qin touched his eyebrows as a strange look flashed across his face. He did not expect the figure in the palace dress to be so courageous that she dared to barge into his ancestral aperture with her divine sense and face the giant golden Buddha that symbolized the inheritance of the strongest divine skill, the Buddha's palm. One must know that even Su Qin was under great pressure when facing this giant golden Buddha. And this was under the premise that the giant golden Buddha recognized Su Qin as its master and would not harm Su Qin. As for the figure in the palace dress, if the figure in the palace dress turned around and ran, Su Qin might have to spend a moment to suppress her. But she barged into his ancestral aperture. It could only be said that she did not want to live anymore. On this trip, I've learned some news about the overseas world. Su Qin's mind entered the ancestral aperture between his eyebrows. He glanced at the golden Buddha that still seemed indestructible and eternal as he thought silently. After confirming that there was no earth immortal powerhouse, Su Qin felt much more relaxed. To the overseas martial arts legends, becoming a terrestrial immortal was far out of their reach. In fact, it was basically a legend. However, in Su Qin's eyes, as long as they followed the prescribed order, it would take at most a few hundred years to achieve it. Compared to Su Qin's 1,000 years of Shoyuan's life, a few hundred years was not unacceptable. It was completely affordable. Right? I haven't signed in here yet. Su Qin calmed himself down and suddenly thought. When he left Chong, and this time, he deliberately left a sign-in opportunity. He wanted to see if he could find a new sign-in location on the way. Unfortunately, Su Qin walked all the way, especially after entering the 100,000 mountains. He slowed down almost to the extreme, but he still didn't find any other checkpoints. And now, this was the only place that Su Qin hadn't signed in yet. If this place still didn't meet the conditions for signing in, Su Qin could only rush back to the palace to sign in. System sign in. Su Qin paused for a moment and said in his heart, "Congratulations to the host for signing in successfully. Obtain Moon Forging Divine Technique." Moon Forging Divine Technique? Su Qin's thoughts fluctuated. In the next moment, everything about the Moon Forging Divine Technique poured into Su Qin's mind. It turned out to be a secret technique to stabilize divine sense. Su Qin opened his eyes, a thoughtful look on his face. When he saw the beautiful figure in the palace dress just now, he was wondering why her divine sense was so stable. Now it seems that it was because of this secret technique. Good stuff. Su Qin nodded slightly. Joy appeared on his face. Although a peak grade 1 great grandmaster can condense divine sense, and when one reaches the realm of venerable arhat, their divine sense can condense into a substance and can easily kill people with divine sense, create illusions and so on. But even among venerable arhat, there are differences in divine sense. The stronger and more stable the divine sense, the more helpful it is for one's own cultivation. Some legends even completely give up on physical cultivation and focus on divine sense breakthroughs. But the Moon Forging Divine Technique, can stabilize Su Qin's divine sense to a great extent. In the future, when Su Qin encounters legends with extremely powerful divine sense, although he can't say that he can win against them in a competition of divine sense, at least he won't be suppressed by them. This is the advantage of having a stable divine sense. It's time to go. When I return to the Imperial Palace, I will cultivate this moon-forging divine technique. Su Qin took a step forward and disappeared, rushing towards the Chang and Imperial Palace. Shortly after Su Qin left, half a day later, someone discovered that the moon worship had disappeared. The news spread. The whole of Nanzhao was shaken. For hundreds of years, the moon worship has been in Nanzhao, and its status is higher than that of the previous rulers. How could such a behemoth disappear just like that? At first, no one believed it and thought it was nonsense. But as time passed, more and more people returned from the 100,000 mountains and repeated this matter, and everyone was stunned. Especially in the original position of the moon worship, there was a huge handprint, as if the entire moon worship had been erased by the owner of this handprint. Suddenly, Nanzhao fell into a panic. That was the moon worship. How could it be erased just like that? If it was said that the other martial arts sects in the world joined forces to fight the moon worship for several days and nights, and finally destroyed the moon worship, it would be barely acceptable. But what was the truth? The moon worship disappeared silently, as if it had never appeared at all. Who on earth pressed that handprint? Who pressed it? I think it's a real immortal. I'm afraid only a real immortal can do this. Countless people in Nanzhao whispered, and their tone was full of awe. For them, the existence that could destroy the entire moon worship with a single palm was no different from an immortal, even if it wasn't. Nanzhao Lord looked anxious, and kept pacing back and forth. What should we do? What should we do? The sect leader has disappeared, the elders have disappeared, and everything of the saint has disappeared. Nanzhao Lord muttered to himself, and his face was full of fear. At this moment, one of the officials below suddenly stood up. Your Majesty, perhaps the disappearance of the Holy Church is not a bad thing for our Nanzhao. As soon as these words came out, the expressions of many ministers on the scene changed slightly. If the moon worship still existed, no minister would dare to have such thoughts. But now that the saint had disappeared, from the moon worshippers to the disciples of the saint, no one had survived, and some thoughts were naturally born. For hundreds of thousands of years, the status of the moon worship in Nanzhao was so high that it could easily interfere with the replacement of the Lord. And now, the moon worship had disappeared, which was equivalent to a shackle on Nanzhao's body had disappeared with it. Chapter 134. While Nanzhao was in a sensation, Su Qin had returned to the Emperor of Tang's palace. Su Qin naturally didn't know the impact of his destruction of moon worship on Nanzhao. Or even if Su Qin knew, he wouldn't think too much about it. Nanzhao is located in the southwest. It is a small country. There is not even a grade 1 great grandmaster in the whole country. Even if the restriction of moon worship is gone, what can they do? After Su Qin returned to the imperial palace, he returned to his usual life. From the time Su Qin left, it had only been half a day. No one in the entire imperial palace thought that in this short period of time, Su Qin would travel tens of thousands of li, destroy the Holy Moon Church in Nanzhao, and then slowly return. At night, Su Qin sat cross-legged. Bits and pieces of information about the moon-forging divine technique flowed in his mind. Moon-forging divine technique is a divine sense secret technique that can stabilize Su Qin's divine sense to a great extent. Okay, let's start. Su Qin closed his eyes, and a huge amount of divine sense began to brew in his body, constantly dispersing and reorganizing according to the method of moon-forging divine technique. If it was someone else, even a legend like Venerable Arhat, it would take a lot of time to fully comprehend this moon-forging divine technique, and even those with poor comprehension would not be able to get started at all. After all, moon-forging divine technique involves the forging of divine sense. If one is not sure that they have fully comprehended it, who would dare to mess around with their own divine sense? But Su Qin is different. After the system's infusion, his mastery of this divine sense secret technique has probably reached the level of the founder. Although it is his first time practicing it, he is very familiar with it. Wang. Under Su Qin's control, his huge divine sense suddenly spread out, turning into extremely small thoughts, and then these thoughts were recombined to construct a more stable divine sense. Under normal circumstances, Venerable Arhat's or martial arts legend's divine sense would be scattered, but the moon-forging divine sense could reassemble the scattered divine sense and unleash a power that far exceeded the original divine sense. It was just like charcoal and diamonds. They were obviously made of the same material, but because of the different structural combination, they showed two completely different forms. It was the same for divine will. However, compared to external substances, divine sense was much finer. The slightest carelessness could damage the foundation of divine sense, causing great hidden dangers. Even Su Qin wouldn't have dared to split his divine will like this without the moon-forging art. As his divine sense continued to reorganize, Su Qin felt that his mind was becoming clearer and clearer, and his thoughts were becoming more agile. It's about time. According to the description of the moon-forging divine art, I should have already mastered it. Su Qin slowly opened his eyes and carefully sensed his surroundings. A look of surprise appeared on his face. Although my divine consciousness is much weaker now, its quality is much better than before. Su Qin was overjoyed. Moreover, the stability of my divine sense has also improved my cultivation speed a lot. Su Qin slightly nodded, his thoughts fluctuating. If a grade 1 great grandmaster wants to go further, he needs to transform his body, internal strength, and divine sense. Venerable Arhat and legends also pay attention to the body, true essence, and divine sense. Whether it is the Venerable Arhat who just entered the first heavenly layer or the Venerable Arhat who cultivated to the limit, the body, true essence, and divine sense are the three cornerstones of oneself, the most fundamental things. A strong body can nurture more divine sense. Similarly, a strong divine sense can counterattack the body and speed up the cultivation speed. At this moment, Su Qin was in a similar state. Next, I have to work hard and strive to reach the great Arhat realm as soon as possible. Su Qin calmed down and thought silently in his heart. The great Arhat realm is the realm after Venerable Arhat, and is equivalent to the Earth Immortal. Of course, whether it is the great Arhat realm or the Earth Immortal realm, they are essentially different names for martial artists of the same level. In fact, the essence of the power controlled by the two is the same, similar to Venerable Arhat and legends. Next, Su Qin once again devoted himself to cultivation. Every day, except for cultivation and signing in, he hardly paid attention to anything else. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, occasionally brought his children to chat with Su Qin, letting Li Yuan and Li Wan get closer to Su Qin. Compared to other imperial family heirs, the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, was more willing to let his children get closer to Su Qin. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, has been on the throne for so many years and is used to people's cunning, but he still can't see any scheming in Su Qin. Only in front of Su Qin does the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, feel that he is not the emperor, but the poor scholar who had nothing. And since the last time Su Qin reminded the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, that the premise of removing the vassals is that he has enough confidence, the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, has never mentioned the matter of removing the vassals in front of his subjects. Su Qin knew in his heart that the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, was enduring. Enduring is not cowardice, nor is it admitting defeat, but for the future of the Empire of Tang. Li Si, who has lived 2 lives, naturally knows that the most effective way to remove the vassals is to implement the order of pushing grace. As long as the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, issued a decree to allow the vassals to divide their territories equally among their children. In this way, the territories of the vassals will be smaller and smaller. Although the overall situation will not change, it will fall into the hands of different people, and the power will be scattered, which will weaken the power of the vassals without bloodshed. However, the implementation of the order of pushing grace is based on the premise that the vassals are obedient. In other words, you have to let the vassals do what the order of pushing grace says. But now the problem the Empire of Tang is that the vassals are simply ignoring the imperial power. Let alone the order of pushing grace, even if the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, issued any decree, when it comes to the vassals' territories, it is as if there is no decree. Besides, the vassals are not fools. Every vassal has countless strategists under their command, and they can certainly guess the effect of the order of pushing grace on the vassals. Time passed slowly. In the blink of an eye, 3 years have passed. During these 3 years, Although the Empire of Tang is still restricted by the vassals in various places, on the whole, it shows a trend of prosperity. The Emperor of Tang Li Sheng is bold and decisive, developing business, increasing taxes, and the silver in the treasury is enough. In addition, under the coaxing and pestering of Princess Li Wan, the Emperor of Tang Li Sheng finally agreed to let her practice martial arts. In fact, the Emperor of Tang Li Sheng does not want to see Li Wan step into martial arts. In the view of the Emperor of Tang Li Sheng, every martial artist has not been polishing their body for decades, and their life is plain. Li Wan, as a princess, does not need to suffer this at all. On this day, in the right spring square, Su Qin is sitting cross-legged, and his breath is flowing endlessly, slowly but steadily rising. Suddenly, Su Qin's breath suddenly stopped, and the rising speed suddenly slowed down, and then calmed down after a while. And at this time, Su Qin slowly opened his eyes, and a smile appeared on his face. Finally, it is complete. Su Qin's thoughts fluctuated, and his face showed joy. Chapter 135. Inside the right spring square. Su Qin slowly retracted his aura. Compared to my previous estimate of reaching the peak of the fourth heavenly layer, it's at least 1 to 2 years earlier. Su Qin touched his chin, a thoughtful look in his eyes. One must know that with Su Qin's current eyesight, even if his estimate was wrong, it would at most be half a month to a month, but now it was a full year to 2 years earlier. It should be the moon-forging divine art that stabilized my divine sense and improved my cultivation speed. Su Qin speculated in his heart. Although he knew that stabilizing his divine sense was beneficial to his martial Dao cultivation when he practiced the moon-forging divine art, he didn't expect the improvement to be so great. That trip to Nanzhao was worth it, Ruantuan said. Su Qin nodded slightly, quite satisfied. Through the trip to Nanzhao, not only did he obtain this divine sense secret technique, but he also learned the specific level of the overseas martial artists. Since I've reached the peak, I should prepare to break through to the fifth heavenly layer. Su Qin slowly got up, walked out of the right spring square, and walked slowly along the shaded path. The East Palace was still as deserted as ever, but Su Qin had long been used to it and even enjoyed it. For Su Qin, the power, beauty, and wealth of the secular world were all ephemeral, only his own strength was fundamental. It was the same in the Shaolin Temple, and it was the same in the palace of the Emperor of Tang. Otherwise, with Su Qin's ability, even if he wanted to sit on the dragon throne, it would be a matter of a thought. Who in the Empire of Tang could stop him? But the emperor was not someone who could be just because he wanted to. Throughout the 500 years of the Empire of Tang, except for the founding ancestor, almost all the emperors had no achievements in martial Dao. Even the founding ancestor only established the Empire of Tang after stepping into the realm of martial arts legend. Not only the Empire of Tang, but the emperors of all the countries in the world were similar. Why is this? A person's energy is limited. If one wants to achieve great achievements in martial Dao, they must invest a lot of energy, but the emperor couldn't do it. This was obviously in conflict with what Su Qin wanted. Su Qin walked in the East Palace unhurriedly, his thoughts empty. In the past 3 years, in addition to cultivation, Su Qin also signed in countless treasures. Although most places in the palace of the Emperor of Tang could only be signed once, there were still more than a dozen places where Su Qin could repeatedly fleece. For example, in front of the altar of the crop altar, in front of the Taiji Palace, he signed in and obtained the celestial being aura gazing technique. In front of Bright Jade Square, he signed in and used the 18 dragons subduing palms. Among them, the vermilion fruit was the most helpful to Su Qin. In terms of medicinal efficacy, the vermilion fruit was at least dozens of times better than the blood bodhi. Even Su Qin needed a week to barely digest one vermilion fruit. One had to know that ever since Su Qin's body underwent the fourth transformation and entered the Arhat realm, even if he absorbed the 9 revolutions whirling pill and glazed golden core, it only took a moment. But the vermilion fruit took a week, so one could imagine how terrifying its medicinal efficacy was. Unfortunately, I only signed in a few hundred vermilion fruits in 3 years. Su Qin shook his head slightly, feeling a little regretful. Originally, after signing in thousands of blood bodhi and thousands of drops of innate spirit liquid, He was prepared to use the sign and opportunity on other things. But ever since he signed in the vermilion fruit, Su Qin's interest in the crop altar was reignited. There was also the secret technique, the celestial divination technique, which also made Su Qin very happy. The celestial divination technique can observe the qi of the world, similar to Su Qin's eye of truth. The difference is that the celestial divination technique is not a divine ability. Su Qin also discovered that if he combined the celestial divination technique with the eye of truth, he might be able to see half of the empire of Tang at a glance. As for the 18 dragon subduing palms, it is an offensive internal divine art. With Su Qin's current strength, once he uses it, he might be able to summon 108 golden true dragons, sweeping through everything. Overall, the 18 dragon subduing palms is an average divine art. Among the countless divine arts and secret techniques that Su Qin has mastered, it can probably squeeze into the top 500. In addition to the above 3 items, Su Qin also received a large number of other treasures from signing in. There were cultivation techniques, secret techniques, medicinal pills, and spirit fruits. All of them were of great help to Su Qin. Su Qin slowly circled around the East Palace. When he returned to the right Spring Square again, he found that the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, had been waiting outside for a long time. Third brother. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, saw Su Qin and waved his hand. After 3 years, the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng's temperament has become much more dignified, and he has also aged a lot. White hair has already grown out of his temples. You're here. A smile appeared on Su Qin's face. Su Qin glanced at the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, and asked casually, "Have you encountered something troubling recently?" Although the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, has long been able to hide his emotions, how could he hide it from Su Qin? Some matters in the imperial court. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, shook his head, raised the wine pot in his left hand, and said with a smile, "Third brother, let's drink today." Okay. Su Qin did not refuse. Every time the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, was faced with a major decision, he would come to Su Qin to drink. After the two drank a few cups, the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, looked at Su Qin with envy. Sometimes I really envy third brother. He stands aloof from worldly affairs and is peaceful and carefree. Unlike me, although I am the emperor of a country, the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, sighed with emotion. Su Qin heard this, his eyes calm, and he said nothing. Although he seemed to be at ease, how many people in the world could stay in one place for decades and do the same thing? Let's not talk about this. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, put down his wine cup and asked, "Third brother, do you know what happened in Nanzhao 3 years ago?" Nanzhao? Su Qin looked at the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng. That's right. Third brother, you don't go out, so you shouldn't know. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, suddenly thought of something and continued. The moon worship in Nanzhao was razed to the ground overnight, leaving behind a palm print that suppressed the entire mountain. Tisk. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, paused and said with emotion, "I always thought that there were no martial arts legends in this era, but now it seems that the palm print that destroyed the entire moon worship was probably left by a martial arts legend." The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, knew about this more than 2 years ago, and he was extremely shocked and thought it was impossible. But as time passed, more and more information came to his ears, and he gradually accepted this fact. Su Qin heard this, glanced at the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, and did not say anything. Not only did he know, but he was also the one who left the palm print. I don't know in my lifetime if I can see the glory of a martial arts legend from afar. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, looked very longing. The Empire of Tang had been established for more than 500 years, and only Taizu was a martial arts legend. After Taizu, the strongest was only peak rank 1. As for this era, the Empire of Tang did not have a martial arts legend. Since eunuch Zhao's death, there was not a single peak rank 1 in the entire palace of the Emperor of Tang. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, was helpless, but there was nothing he could do. Martial arts cultivation in the early stage can be piled up with resources, but in the later stage, especially the transformation of a Grade 1 Great Grandmaster, external resources may be useful, but the most important part can only be relied on oneself. Chapter 136. Soon 2 hours passed. The Emperor of Tang Lishang got up and prepared to return to the immortal palace to deal with political affairs. The Emperor of Tang Lishang smiled as he looked at Su Qin and said, "After chatting with the third brother today, I feel much less depressed." Su Qin shook his head and did not reply. The next day, in the Taiji Palace, grab. The Emperor of Tang Lishang sat on the dragon throne and looked down at the court. "I am very grateful for the vassals guarding the border for the Empire of Tang." The Emperor of Tang Lishang did not beat around the bush and said directly. In the past 3 years, although the Emperor of Tang Lishang did not mention anything about removing the vassals, he had thought about it many times in his heart. In the end, the Emperor of Tang Lishang realized that directly removing the vassals was not advisable. It would easily cause turmoil in the Empire of Tang and the vassals to rebel. But directly removing the vassals was not an option, but indirectly removing the vassals kept appearing in the Emperor of Tang Lishang's mind. The Emperor of Tang Lishang spent 3 years and finally came up with a way to indirectly weaken the vassals' strength. In the Taiji Palace, the court officials listened to the Emperor of Tang Lishang's words and looked at each other, confused. A few years ago, they saw the Emperor of Tang Lishang fly into a rage and wanted to remove the vassals. But now the Emperor of Tang Lishang was very moved by the vassals' actions. Just when the court officials were confused, the Emperor of Tang Lishang's words continued to ring. "The vassals have worked hard and made great contributions, but they cannot be separated from the contributions of every child in the family. I have decided to pass down the order and allow the vassals to divide their fiefs to each child," the Emperor of Tang Lishang said slowly. As soon as these words came out, the court officials quieted down. A few of the courtiers thought quickly and quickly understood the purpose of Emperor Lishang's actions. It was nothing more than dividing the power of the kings in this way. It may not be seen in a short time, but in a long time, decades or hundreds of years will pass, and the disaster of the kings will inevitably be solved. "Your Majesty, this is not appropriate." A court official immediately stood up and bowed to the Emperor of Tang Lishang and said, "The Emperor's eldest son has priority in the succession of the vassals. If Your Majesty abolishes this law, the vassals will be dissatisfied." This minister was sincerely thinking for the Tang Empire. Even he could understand the deeper meaning of Emperor Lishang's order, so how could the kings not understand? "Don't worry, I'm just allowing it, not ordering it. If the vassals don't want to, they can refuse." The Emperor of Tang Lishang was very calm. Before today, he had thought everything clearly. After chatting with Su Qin for a while last night, the Emperor of Tang Lishang was more clear about what he was doing. His decree was an open conspiracy. The vassals could not implement it, but what about their children? Normally, after the death of the old vassal, the eldest son would inherit the position of the vassal. As for the other brothers of the eldest son, they would be left to fend for themselves. In this case, once the Emperor of Tang Lishang allowed the other children of the vassals to inherit the fiefs, it would inevitably cause division among the vassals. Except for the eldest son, the other children would spontaneously support the Emperor of Tang Lishang. "I have made up my mind. You don't have to say any more." The Emperor of Tang Lishang saw that there were still courtiers who wanted to dissuade him, so he waved his hand and left the Taiji Palace. At the same time, outside the East Palace, Su Qin's eyes were calm as he looked in the direction of the Taiji Palace. In the end, he still came up with the decree of pushing grace. Su Qin shook his head slightly and sighed. Last night, Su Qin knew that the Emperor of Tang Lishang had something on his mind, so he paid a little attention to the other party today. Sure enough, the Emperor of Tang Lishang made a move today, however. Although the decree of pushing grace could greatly solve the problem of the vassals, the Emperor of Tang Lishang made a mistake. The order is reversed, Su Qin thought silently in his heart. If the Emperor of Tang Lishang had already defeated all the vassals before implementing the decree of pushing grace, and they were all afraid of him, then implementing the decree of pushing grace would inevitably eliminate all future troubles and completely solve the problem of the vassals. But now, the most important premise had not been achieved, and implementing the decree of pushing grace at this time was tantamount to touching the bottom line of the vassals. Although Su Qin knew that the Emperor of Tang Lishang's action was inappropriate, he did not stop it. If the Emperor of Tang Lishang was assassinated, Su Qin might intervene, but when it came to national affairs, it was still up to the Emperor of Tang Lishang to make his own decisions. It's good to let him suffer. Su Qin turned and walked back to the East Palace. For a long time, the Emperor of Tang Li Shang had been too smooth. Since he ascended the throne, the Emperor of Tang had paved everything for him, and Su Qin had secretly helped him clear the obstacles twice, which deterred the other countries, so everything went smoothly. Although the Emperor of Tang Li Shang had done a lot of practical things, and the Empire of Tang was also thriving under his governance, but there were many things in this world that were not smooth sailing. Soon, as the Emperor of Tang Li Shang's order spread throughout the territories of the 10 vassals, it caused a sensation among the children of the vassals. However, this sensation did not last long before it was suppressed by the vassals. Then, the 10 vassals gathered in a small town. This town did not belong to any of the vassals' territories, but it was close to the vassals' territories, so generally, when the vassals had something to discuss, they would choose to meet here. Haha. The Emperor of Tang and Chong, and city is quite bold, daring to meddle in the affairs of us vassals. The Fanyang King's eyes were cold as he glanced at the other 9 vassals and sneered. When the order of pushing grace was passed to their territories, these vassals realized that something was wrong, and when they noticed the eager gazes of their children, they were sure that it was the Emperor of Tang's doing. Humph! With just a few words he can divide our territories and make brothers turn against each other. This the Emperor of Tang is not only bold, but also vicious, the Shuafang King of Gojoseon also said, his tone full of coldness. As vassals they were hereditary vassals, one generation of vassals, and the next generation of vassals. They were high and mighty, so they naturally did not want to see their descendants constantly divided and eventually become playthings in the hands of the Emperor of Tang. Then what should we do now? The Emperor of Tang has begun to destroy the foundation of US vassals. Are you still going to do nothing? The Norland King asked. He wanted to know what the other vassals were thinking. Of course we won't be indifferent. The Fanyang King shook his head and said, why don't we kill the Emperor of Tang? Since he's disobedient, we'll change the Emperor of Tang. The Jianan King suddenly said. As soon as he said that, the other vassals were immediately tempted. However, the Shuafang King of Gojoseon shook his head and said, so what if we kill him? Which of us vassals is not feared by the past the Emperor of Tang? Even if we kill this one, will the next one be obedient? Besides, the Emperor of Tang's palace should be overseen by some royal ancestor. It's not appropriate for us to assassinate the Emperor of Tang in his palace. The Shuafang King of Gojoseon said softly. Whether it was the death of the 2 peak grade 1 great grandmasters, Nanming King Wuyang and Inzhou Bat outside the imperial city, or the inexplicable disappearance of Yi Guqing and Shimen Shueishua in the Emperor of Tang's palace, it all showed that there was a great terror in the Emperor of Tang's palace. Chapter 137. The words of the Shuafang of Gojoseon made the other 9 vassals fall into silence. We can't do this and we can't do that. Are we supposed to tolerate the Emperor of Tang's probing? The King of Fanyang frowned and said with dissatisfaction. The King of Norland suddenly looked at the Shuafang of Gojoseon and asked, the Shuafang of Gojoseon, since you said so, you must have a solution, right? I do have a solution. Hearing this, the Shuafang of Gojoseon smiled and looked at the other vassals. We can't kill the Emperor of Tang, but we can teach him a lesson. As long as we let the Emperor of Tang know that it is extremely difficult for him to do anything to us vassals. As soon as the Shuafang of Gojoseon finished speaking, the other vassals' eyes suddenly lit up. Indeed, what the Shuafang of Gojoseon said made a lot of sense. The Emperor of Tang had always been extremely hostile to the vassals. Killing the Emperor of Tang would not solve any problem at all. Only by making the Emperor of Tang retreat and completely give up the idea of being hostile to the vassals could the problem be solved fundamentally. But, how should we teach the Emperor of Tang a lesson? The provincial governor of Norland asked tentatively. The Shuafang of Gojoseon heard this and did not reply. Instead, he looked at the other vassals. Over the years, you must have some results from your infiltration of the imperial court. The Shuafang of Gojoseon's words made all the vassals' faces change. The vassals were in charge of their territories and lived a carefree life far away from the emperor. But the vassals were not fools. Any vassal with a little foresight would know how to rope in the ministers, and used them as pawns in the imperial court. In this way, no matter what happened in the imperial court, they would be the first to know. Shuafeng of Gojoseon, why are you asking this? The king of Norland said with great vigilance. The 10 vassals were not united and had some friction with each other. Otherwise, they would not have chosen this place to meet. And the ministers they roped in were top secrets of the vassals. If the news spread and the Emperor of Tang found out, they would be roped in for nothing. It's very simple. Use these pawns to teach the Emperor of Tang a lesson. The Shuafeng of Gojoseon looked at the 9 vassals and said, Lesson? Please tell me more about it. The vassals looked at each other and asked when they heard this. Chang'an. Inside the palace. Taiji Palace. The Emperor of Gojoseon was in high spirits. Was of the two to be in the vassal of Gojoseon. Mise of Goi, the Emperor of Esovs of Gojoseon. At this moment, a minister stood up, bowed slightly, and said loudly, Your Majesty, the vassals are the foundation of the country. I hope Your Majesty will take back the imperial edict and no longer interfere with the succession of the vassals. After the minister finished speaking, he knelt on the ground and did not get up. The Emperor of Gojoseon Li Shang frowned slightly. He had already expressed his determination some time ago, and now a minister stood up to persuade him. This was something that the Emperor of Gojoseon Li Shang did not expect. Just when the Emperor of Gojoseon Li Shang was about to reprimand the minister, another minister stood up. Your Majesty, the vassals are the foundation of the country. I hope Your Majesty will take back the imperial edict and no longer interfere with the succession of the vassals. The Emperor of Gojoseon Li Shang frowned and looked at the second minister. Before the Emperor of Gojoseon Li Shang spoke, Your Majesty, the vassals are the foundation of the country. I hope Your Majesty will take back the imperial edict and no longer interfere with the succession of the vassals. Your Majesty, the vassals are the foundation of the country. I hope Your Majesty will take back the imperial edict and no longer interfere with the succession of the vassals. More and more ministers stood up and persuaded the Emperor of Gojoseon Li Shang. For a while, in the Taiji Palace, nearly half of the ministers knelt down and begged the Emperor of Gojoseon Li Shang to take back the imperial edict. Most of these kneeling ministers were 7th and 6th rank officials. They were usually very inconspicuous, but at this moment they all knelt together, and there was an inexplicable momentum. The rest of the ministers who did not kneel saw this scene, and their expressions changed slightly. You. The Emperor of Gojoseon Li Shang's face was extremely ugly. At this moment, how could he not know that these ministers' behavior was hinted by the vassals from all over the country? The vassals were using this method to warn the Emperor of Gojoseon Li Shang that if he dared to interfere again, he would lose the throne. Good. You are really good. The Emperor of Gojoseon Li Shang suddenly stood up and glared at all the kneeling ministers. I promoted you, put you in an important position and raised you, but you ran to the vassals' side? The Emperor of Gojoseon Li Shang was furious and felt betrayed. Someone come. The prefect of the wonderful pen shop. Take them down, take these people down for me. The Emperor of Gojoseon Li Shang said word by word. Suddenly, a large number of imperial guards swarmed in and escorted out all the officials who had tried to persuade him. In the court. After this happened, the Emperor of Gojoseon Li Shang naturally did not want to continue the court discussion. He waved his sleeves and left the Taiji Palace. In the Palace of Immortals, the Emperor of Gojoseon Li Shang sat on the dragon throne. Did I really do something wrong? The Emperor of Gojoseon Li Shang fell into self-doubt. If he was an incapable ruler, of course, he would not care about the opinions of his ministers, but the Emperor of Gojoseon Li Shang happened to be a wise ruler. He paid great attention to the thoughts of his ministers, but just now, the ministers in the court turned against him, which made the Emperor of Gojoseon Li Shang doubt his determination to remove the vassals. Was he really doing the right thing? Few days later, the Emperor of Gojoseon Li Shang fell ill in extreme self-doubt. Since the Emperor of Gojoseon Li Shang ascended the throne, for nearly 10 years, he had been conscientious and did not dare to have any negligence. Although there was no problem with his body, he had been under great mental pressure for a long time. The betrayal of the ministers was tantamount to the last straw that broke the camel's back. The Emperor of Gojoseon Li Shang had a mental breakdown. For a time the palace was in chaos. Many ministers and Empress Su Yueyun gathered in the Palace of Immortals. After the imperial doctors checked the body of the emperor of Gojoseon Li Shang, they frowned and did not dare to speak. None of the imperial doctors dared to promise that they could cure the emperor of Gojoseon Li Shang. They did not even think of a way to ease the pain of the emperor of Gojoseon Li Shang. Your Majesty, Empress Su Yueyun lay in front of the dragon throne, looking at the unconscious the emperor of Gojoseon Li Shang, and wept. At the same time, the vassals who had been paying close attention to the changes in the court immediately learned of this. Ha ha ha. You want to do something to us vassals? Wait another 100 years. The king of Norland sneered. The other 9 vassals did the same. The palace. Outside the right spring square. Su Qin put his hands behind his back and scanned the Palace of Immortals with his powerful divine sense. A mental breakdown is not something that can be cured by ordinary medicine, Su Qin thought silently. The problem that the Emperor of Gojoseon was the various hidden dangers caused by a mental breakdown at the moment. If not treated in time, even if he survived, his vitality would be greatly damaged, and it would even affect Shoyuan. Forget it. Su Qin sighed softly, took a step and disappeared. The next moment, outside the Palace of Immortals, Su Qin's figure appeared silently. You're tuning into the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.